Oops. Alright. I think I have everything set up. I had to get my water. I came back to the desk and I was like, oh, no, we don't have everything. But something that I think I'm happy about is that I remember when it used to take me so much longer to start my broadcast because of how terrible my anxiety would be. And I would sit in the beginning scene for like 45 minutes. 30, yeah, 30 minutes sometimes. And I talked to my therapist about that today. I was like, oh man, that's a huge improvement. The terror does not eat away at me as much as it used to, so I'm proud of myself. But sometimes I think that that 10 minutes is like needed for me to like calm myself just a little bit more. Um, but welcome in everyone. Welcome back to your cozy horror evening listening podcast before you go to bed, because who else wants to listen to scary stories right before they're getting ready to go to sleep and have very pleasant dreams. I fall asleep listening to some of the most interesting things. Like there's like apocalypse, this apocalypse broadcast that's like a sort of like this guy, and he narrates each of his streams as if like some apocalyptic incident is happening, and he's broadcasting it all to the world over some old AM radio, and his sound design is so good. I'm just like, oh, it has like the old school sort of radio sound and all of that. So I think that stuff's really neat. I really like it. But for our evening, we're gonna listen to the Magnus Archive by the Rusty Quill. I think we left off on episode. Oh, I put 11. We left off on episode 12. I'm sorry. I'll fix it in the description later, so that way when people come back, these are all also being saved to a like one of the playlists. So the ones that we listened to, the Magnus Archives, these are all going to go into any listening that we do. We're just going to have it in the listening party. I guess we'll have to have one for watch party too, but I like listening to stuff. You can use your own imagination. So I like audiobooks as well. Don't tell me what the character is going to look like. I'll make that choice for myself. Um, but yeah, it's interesting listening to the show and then going back and looking at some artists who've actually done some of the like animating some of the episodes, and it's interesting to see how, especially knowing what the voice actors look like, and then going back and looking and seeing what the artists, how they animate them and how they draw them. So only after you have listened to all of these, may you then go. I'll give you my express permission to go and listen to the rest of these. Let's see. What do we have going on? Oh, why isn't our scrolling chat working? Chat mate. Properties. Or did I miss it? Test. No, I did not see it. Why is it not there? Hold on. Because none of our chat bubbles are there. Why? 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 I wonder if the news ticker one is essentially the same thing, or if the news ticker one. I love this Lancome application so much. It tickles all my little fancies. Copy. Let's see if this will make you happy. I mean, it has a local file, which I don't know why it's not working. Why? None of our chats are working. What is happening? What did I break? Onion time. Time to cry. Oh, wow. Okay, let me disconnect this and connect this again. Okay. Let me get the test dummy out. Why aren't any of my chat messages visible? What is happening? What did I break? There's no filters on. Let's see, is our cloud chat working? The cloud chat is working, just not the scrolling. Why? I want the scrolly baby. I wonder. Why don't you want to do the thing that I want you to do? One calm. We're going to do this, and we're going to test it again. The pain and suffering of it all. The deep, unbearable harm that this causes my brain. I can't take it anymore. Free me from this nightmare. News ticker, do you work? Hey! Now, it's huge. You're rather large there. Properties. How do we fix you? We're gonna do this really quickly. Sorry, I know this is gonna look very strange for a moment. God, I love that active testing on scene, right? Oh no, it's still really big. How do I adjust your size? What is the other screen size? It's not 1920 by 1080p, it's it is... How much is the dog in the window? The road, the wagon train. Okay. We will do without it today, because I still have to figure out why the other one is not happy, because nothing has changed. Unless it's because it's not a local file. Browse. Is that how they normally are? Let me check my other one that's actually working. My little cute cloud chat. Oh, it is a local file. Well, shiver me timbers, I may have figured it out. Except I messed up the thingy. So, I should actually look and see where that file was. We're gonna copy this folder location here. Copy address. Cancel, cancel. Thank you for just enjoying the background sounds while I adjust this for your listening pleasure and viewing pleasure. Uh-oh. I messed it up already. Okay, I found it. Oh no! I didn't turn it off. There's that one. Where's the custom? Oh god. It's this one. Yes. 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 Okay. I am enjoying the sound indeed. Hey, you've been asking for rain, actually. Yay! Oh, we won't be able to eat them anymore, though. But let's test it on the dummy. Go. Yay! I love that so much. Although we need to make it full screen again. It rained yesterday, remember? Oh, it did. You're right, baby. Thank you. Transform it to screen. And now everything should be happy. Happy? 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 Hey. If you, even if you're not a VTuber, if you're a streamer and you need an application to create fun things with and have fun different chat visuals, check out OneCom. It's I believe it's by a Japanese creator. It's a really cute. Water so good. It is yum. Alright, we do need to start things. Let me know if I need to turn down the what's it called? I need to turn down the rain audio. Or maybe we shouldn't have it on actually, because it kind of, I don't know, like I think there's something eerie about the, it all sounds good to me, thank you. Thank you, dear. I I kind of like how there's like the silence on some parts of the episodes where it's like, oh my gosh. But yeah. Okay, so I think we're gonna start off with episode 12, which is Hi honey, how are you today? We're getting ready to listen to scary stories. This is where we are on the playlist. If you've been following along, I usually post the first one that we listen to. So that way, if you want to play it on your own, you can. But I'm going to play the audio so that we can listen along together. Did you have a good day, baby? And then, where is our timer? Okay, there's OCB. Oh, I hope you have a good night, honey. So where is our target counter? What number are we even at now? Hugs. Thank you, honey. I hope you have very, very restful sleep. We are currently at 73 dreamers. We're almost to our goal of 100. Thank you to our new babies who have joined. Welcome. And a good night kiss just for you. Alright, 73. Woohoo! We're gonna keep going and pushing for our goals. Where did I put the timer at? The last time I was looking for it, it was one of the highlighted ones that were already visible, and I was like, of course, I didn't see it. Yep, see, it's already there. I just don't remember where we put it, because we moved some things around for our last... Okay, should still be in the corner then. Alright, as we do here, I'm going to count back from 5, and when we get to 1, we're gonna click play, but you don't need to worry about all of that. I'll take care of it for you. So you just sit back, relax, allow yourself to get comfortable where you're going to rest tonight. I hope that you have the opportunity to fall asleep with us, because that is the highest honor for a dream siren. I need you to sleep so you can dream. so I can watch over your dreams for you. So you have to go to bed. You must do the eat. But do join us for a little bit. I've got my water, I've got some ginger tea, and of course, you know, I've got my little movie snacks. I've got some Starburst jelly beans that I'll be munching on. I put a password on my dreams. No! How dare you! I don't want stalkers like you! How dare you! It's my job! I can't stalk if it's my job! Give me your dreams. Hand them over. Hand them here now. Alright, I'm gonna start the countdown. We'll see if I don't mess it up on the first time. And I've cleared the clock from last time. Alright, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Hey, let's go. I did it.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus
Archives. I love it. I love this show so much. Yay to Rusty Quill.
Episode 12. First Aid.
1, I should have asked my artist to make it so there is a bit of my animation where I do actually drink my tea. But we'll take infinite stirring.
Statement of Lazire Saraki regarding a night shift at St. Thomas Hospital, London.
Ooh, it's a
Original
hospital
statement
episode.
given February 11th, 2012. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, Head Archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. I'm a nurse at St. Thomas Hospital, down in Lambeth near Waterloo Station. Technically these days I work for Guy's and St. Thomas NHS Foundation Trust, but Guy's Hospital is at a completely different location, the other side of London, so for the sake of clarity I work at St. Thomas. Christmas is one of the worst periods to be working at a hospital, and in the accident and emergency department it's even more unpleasant. Pensioners who can't afford to properly heat their homes, drunken party-goers who overindulge and hurt themselves, even just people who didn't look where they were going and slipped on a patch of ice. Christmas brings out the side of people that always seems to lead them to the hospital. So I was relieved last year when I got my shift pattern and learned that my last A&E shift of the season was going to be on the 23rd, 2 full days before Christmas itself. That was the good news. The bad news was that the 23rd was also the Friday immediately before the big day, and that meant people finishing work for the holidays and going out for some celebration. When you work in accident and emergency, there are few words that fill your heart with such dread as the word celebration. That night wasn't as bad as some I'd seen.
I thought it
A
would
few
be full
broken
moon.
bones and a couple of drug-fueled injuries, but no fights or angry drunks, which was a blessing. It must have been about 1:30 in the morning that the ambulance arrived. They had radioed ahead, and we knew that we had a pair of severe burn victims being brought in, so we were as ready as we could have been. I was heading out to meet the ambulance when I noticed that the A&E waiting room was totally silent. I looked around, and there were all the people there that I expected to see, some cradling obvious injuries, but none of them made a sound. They continued to stare at their phone, read books, comfort one another, but not one of them spoke. I didn't have much time to really consider what I was seeing, as at that moment I heard the ambulance pull up outside and ran off to see to the first patient. By the time I arrived, they were already wheeling him out, and the doctor was assessing his burns. The doctor's name was Kaylee Grice, and she was a junior doctor at St. Thomas. She started giving some instructions to myself and the EMTs, but I was struck by how quietly she was speaking to me. She didn't whisper, but every word was very soft, as though it was a real effort to get them out. Nobody else seemed to notice, so at the time I assumed the effect was due to my own lack of sleep. I've always had difficulty adjusting to the late nights, and this time had been particularly bad. We finished transferring him to a treatment room, the only available one we had that night, and the doctor and EMTs returned to get the other patient while I began dealing with the burns on the first. I'm 48 years old, and I have been a nurse for most of that, so I've seen a good number of burns in my time. I was prepared for some deeply unpleasant scenes when the call came in, as bad burns can be some of the nastiest injuries you see working in a hospital. These ones surprised me. They were second degree, which is severe, but not usually such as to require hospitalization, except that they appeared to cover his entire body. Every inch of exposed skin showed signs of this burning, and cutting away his clothes it became apparent that the damage had spread there as well. Anything hot enough to cause this sort of effect should have damaged his clothing or even melted them onto the skin in places. But they were utterly unharmed, as though he had been dressed after he'd been burned, or the heat had passed right through his clothes without touching them. He was a tall man, heavy set, with the sort of build I associate with an athletic middle age. Any hair he might have had was gone,
I
apparently
genuinely
burned
don't
off,
remember this
and his
episode.
clothes were a nondescript black suit and white shirt. He didn't scream or cry or moan in pain. And in fact, the doctor had had to check his pulse when he'd come in to confirm he was still alive. He was. But as far as I could tell, he appeared to be sleeping peacefully. I had just started treatment when the second patient was wheeled in. He was in almost identical shape to the first, except for the fact that the burns seemed to stop at his neck, along a clear line. It was as though he'd been wearing a choker that the heat couldn't get above, but his neck was bare. He was smaller than the first man, and younger, I'd guess in his mid-30s. He was clean-shaven, but had long hair dyed completely black. He wore a similar suit to the older man, except that over the top he wore a long black leather coat, just as undamaged as the rest. It looked new, and I felt quite bad having to cut it off him, but we had to confirm how extensive his injuries were. Like the first, he was completely covered in almost uniform second-degree burns, except for what at first I thought were small black scorch marks. Looking closer, I saw that they were eyes. Small, tattooed eyes on every one of his joints, his knees, his elbows, and even his knuckles, as well as just over his heart. I would have expected the burns to have almost destroyed tattoos that small, but instead they were unblemished, and the skin about a centimetre around each one also didn't seem to have been affected. To say I was unsettled by this would have been something of an understatement. I barely noticed when Dr. Bryce and the EMTs returned. They seemed to be talking normally now, discussing who these two people were. Apparently the fire brigade had responded to reports of a blaze in a building site near St. Mary's churchyard and had turned up to find the two men lying unconscious. There had been no fire, although the ground they lay on showed several burn marks, and a metal bar that had been lying nearby appeared to have bent slightly, as if from great heat. The fire service had called out an ambulance, and they had brought the men here. Apparently the older one hadn't had anything on him at all, no ID, no phone, no keys, nothing. While the younger man had only a Zippo lighter with an eye design on it, similar to the one tattooed all over him, and an old passport that identified him as Jared Key.
Okay.
I never got to look at the passport, but from the way the EMTs were talking about it, I gathered the man was well-travelled. It was at this point that the EMTs had to head out on another call, and Dr. Grice and I got down to treating the two men, the weirdness temporarily forgotten. Medically speaking, there was nothing abnormal about the burns, and it didn't take as long as I had feared to get them properly cleaned and bandaged. Throughout it all, the two of them didn't stir, and I wondered if they were comatose, but that sort of diagnosis would require a lot more testing, which probably wasn't going to happen that night. So, having finished giving them what treatment we could, the men were moved to one of the few wards with bed space, and I returned to working A&E. And, for an hour or so, I forgot about the odd strangers that lay unconscious just a few doors away. I only noticed them again when I had to pass through that ward heading towards the nearby stockroom for some more gauze. As I walked through, I became aware of a sound coming from the bed of the older burn victim. I never did find out his name. I walked towards him slowly, straining my ears to hear what he was saying. It was so quiet as to be almost inaudible, but was definitely words, the same words over and over. The more I heard, the more it sounded like most of them weren't in English. The first sounded like a sark, or a sarg, then vipalach, and finally in English, the lightless flame. The last part was very clear, and I assumed he was talking about whatever burned him, but he said it with such intensity that the words made me feel quite uncomfortable. His eyes were still closed and his lips were barely moving. I started to feel warm, like there was a fever quickly creeping out towards my skin. It wasn't the first time I'd had a reaction like this, though, so I took a moment to center myself, and the feeling receded. The burned man was still whispering. I might even have called it chanting, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do, so I checked his bandages to make sure that they didn't need changing, and left to go and continue my shift. If I saw Dr. Gryce, which was more than likely, then I could tell her that our mystery burn victim had started talking. Mostly I just wanted to get out of that room for as long as possible. It was as I returned to the main accident and emergency reception that things started to get really strange. And by really strange, I mean that the reception was completely empty. I don't care how late it gets, and at this point it was nearly 3 a.m, the waiting room for A&E is always full, especially on a night like this. I mean, I'd been in there not 5 minutes before, and there were upwards of 30 people. But now it was utterly deserted.
Being in
Even
any
the staff at the
hospital
admissions
empty is
desk
terrifying.
gone. I was freaked out, quite frankly, and started checking through all of the examination rooms, the wards next door, and the individual patient rooms. All empty, except for those patients physically too sick to move or hooked up to IVs. They lay there sleeping, and part of me wanted to wake them just to hear the sound of another human being, to not be alone. But like I say, it was 3 a.m, and weird as all this was, I couldn't justify waking up patients just to put my own mind at ease. I went as far as to make as much noise as possible directly outside their rooms, but they just slept on. It was as I returned to the waiting room for the 3rd time in as many minutes that I heard it. It sounded like the growl of an animal, a rolling, angry sound, and I realized that the floor was shaking ever so slightly. I looked around for the source of the noise. I was getting more and more frantic by the second, and then I saw it. Lined up against the wall of the waiting room were 2 vending machines. I rarely paid them any attention, as there were better options in the staff room, and one or both of them were usually out of order. But I now saw that the one on the left, a clear-fronted machine that stocked bottled soft drinks, was shaking violently. As I got nearer, I saw why. In every bottle, in every row of the machine, the drinks appeared to be violently boiling. Cokes and lemonades and fruit juices shook and bubbled before one by one the bottles exploded, coating the inside of the clear plastic front with liquid that still kept steaming and hissing. It couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds for all of them to pop. And then the waiting room was silent once again. At this point, I was just about ready to abandon my shift and leave the hospital.
Yes.
Whatever was going on there, I wanted no part of it.
Yes.
I ran towards the door leading from the A&E to the chill of the December night, not something I would ever have thought I'd look forward to. As I approached, though, I noticed that the plastic at each end of the metal handles was ever so slightly warped. I tentatively touched the back of my hand to them and withdrew it almost immediately. I didn't even have to touch it to feel the intense heat radiating from the door. I almost wept. If I was getting out of there, it wasn't going to be through that door. I started to make my way back through the wards, heading towards another exit, but as I passed through, I could hear the burned man still mumbling to himself, louder now, so that his weird chant was audible even outside of his room, and it was starting to get to me. I went in. I don't know what I was planning to do. I just needed to make him shut up somehow. His eyes were open now, bloodshot behind the bandages and staring blankly towards the ceiling. At that moment, I decided that I was going to shut him up, even if I had to physically hold his mouth closed. I approached him slowly and reached towards his face. A second before I could touch him, a hand shot out and grabbed me by the wrist. I turned to see the other burn victim, whose passport had identified him as Jared Key, on his feet and shaking his head. His grip on my wrist was far stronger than I would ever have expected from someone that injured. I could feel a heat through his bandaged hand, like his skin was still burning somehow. I screamed. Why not? I'd already established no one was around to hear me. He immediately released my hand and apologized, said he'd only been trying to protect me. I asked him from what, and he gestured to the burned man still lying motionless in his bed, chanting his nonsense phrases. Sparing a glance at his own wrapped form, he said that touching the man would have been a bad idea. He seemed to be in tremendous pain as he spoke, but did his best to hide it. I didn't say anything then. I wanted to ask what was happening, and it seemed like he was waiting for me to do just that. But something stopped me. Something told me that if there was a coherent explanation for everything that had happened since the ambulance arrived, then I would be no better off for knowing it. After a few seconds of awkward silence, Jared spoke. He asked me if the paramedics had brought any items in with them. Specifically, he was after a small book bound in red leather and a brass pendant he had been wearing. He didn't say what design had been on the pendant, but I guessed it had been an eye. I told him that neither of those things had been brought in with him, and he was quiet for a long time. After the last 10 minutes spent desperately wishing for another human being to talk to, I should have been relieved with Jared's company. But watching him, standing and walking despite the burns covering 80% of his body, despite the sheer quantity of painkillers we had given him, it just made me very afraid. Finally he nodded, as though dismissing me, and limped past into the corridor, towards the supply cupboard. I followed him, asked what he was doing. I got no answer, but he seemed to know the code to the door immediately, and strode right in, scanning the shelves for something. He saw what he was after and picked up a small object wrapped in paper and plastic. I recognized it immediately as a sterile scalpel. He was going to kill the chanting man. I could feel it in the way he stared past me as I stood in the doorway. He started walking towards me. The storage room was not big, and it took him barely a second before he was in front of me, but it was the longest second I've ever experienced, as I tried to decide whether to risk my own life for that of the burned stranger, blankly chanting his unsettling prayer. Behind Jared, I saw bottles of saline solution start to bubble and boil. I stepped aside. He nodded in appreciation and said something that I remember very clearly, even though it still makes no sense. He said, "Yes, for you, better beholding than the lightless flame." I didn't try to stop him as he walked back into the ward. I just stood there and watched as he took out the scalpel, muttered some words I couldn't make out, and plunged the blade into the center of the chanting man's throat. At that moment there was the sound of sizzling and a smell like rotten meat on a grill. I watched as the flesh around that wound began to blacken and crack. The bandages curled and disintegrated, and the scorched skin spread over his body like water. There was no fire, and I felt no heat. But over the course of 20 seconds, I watched this man's body cremate itself to ash. Even the scalpel was gone. Jared Key walked over to his own bed, and picking up the empty bedpan beneath it, gently swept the ashes into the basin and handed it to me, asking me to dispose of it. I took it and numbly walked out, heading towards a medical waste bin. As I walked the corridor, I noticed a figure at the other end. It was Dr. Grice. I'm not ashamed to admit that I wept in relief as I ran to the waiting room and saw it once again full of people complaining and moaning to themselves. By the time I was finished and got back to the room, Jared was lying in his own bed, apparently sleeping. I considered asking him now what had happened, but at that moment another ambulance arrived with 3 members of a Christmas party that had gotten dangerously out of hand. Just like that, the rest of my shift was gone. Jared Key was treated for a further 4 days in the hospital before being discharged into the care of his mother. I tried to talk to him about what happened, but he was on a lot of painkillers and never seemed to really register I was there. It may have been feigned, I suppose, but in the end the result was the same. Since then I've just tried not to think about it. I'd managed to get almost 30 years of nursing under my belt before something like this happened, so with any luck, I'll be long retired by the time anything like it happens again. I worry sometimes, though. Over the last few months, when I'm alone on the ward,
Oh my gosh.
I get the feeling I'm being watched. Not threatened or judged, just watched. I avoid that storeroom, particularly. Statement ends. There's obviously a lot to unpack here, so let's start with what is provable. Sasha managed to get access to the hospital records for this period, and they do list the admission of Jared Key and an unknown male for burn injuries similar to what Ms. Saraki described. Furthermore, there are only discharge papers for Jared Key, and a short police report on the disappearance of the second burn victim. No evidence of foul play was found, and no official missing persons case was ever opened. As far as the mystery man's chanting goes, if it was indeed a Sarg that he was saying, then that's quite interesting. A Sarg is the name of a demon in Sumerian mythology associated with disease and corruption, which doesn't really seem to have much relevance to this statement, except that it was also fabled that a Sarg was able to boil fish alive in their rivers. Admittedly, in Sumerian myth, this was because he was monstrously ugly, but a curious coincidence nonetheless. The Palach might also be a mishearing of the Polish word wypalać, according to Martin, which means to cauterize or brand. Admittedly, if Martin speaks Polish in the same way he speaks Latin, then he might be talking nonsense again, but I've looked it up and it appears to check out. I can't find anything conclusive on the phrase, the lightless flame, however. It crops up in a lot of different contexts throughout various esoteric literatures. It has not escaped my notice that this is the second time Jared Key has turned up in this archive. I'd be very keen to get his statement, but unfortunately it looks like he passed away from a brain tumor late last year. We're doing further research into him, though. If we're lucky, maybe we already have a statement from him tucked away somewhere in these damn files. We contacted Miss Saraki to see if she wanted to make a follow-up statement, but she declined. Apparently she still gets the watched feeling occasionally, but aside from that, there haven't been any other abnormal occurrences in her professional or personal life. One final note. Sasha has been able to access the hospital's CCTV footage for the night of 23rd December 2011. It shows something quite startling. I had assumed that there was a significant hallucinatory element to Ms. Saraki's story, and indeed the ward where Jared Key was admitted didn't have a camera. But the accident and emergency waiting room did. At 03:11:22, it shows everybody in that room, which I personally counted at 28 people, standing up and calmly filing out of the doors. After this, Ms. Saraki can be seen entering and leaving 3 times, once taking a minute to stare at something beneath the camera, which I assume to be the vending machine. The rest of the staff and patients do not return until 03:27:12, over 15 minutes after they left, when they walk back in through the same doors. The footage does not contain any sound, and no alarm of any sort was recorded, so I cannot offer any guess as to why they left or what they were doing in the intervening time. There is one other thing Sasha highlighted, however. At 03:22:52, the feed cuts out for less than a second, and is replaced for a single frame by a close-up of a human eye staring back through the video feed. Recording ends.
That is so hot.
The Magnus.
That is so hot. No wonder everything that was near was literally boiling. So I don't remember listening to that episode at all, but I will say that the necklace that he was talking about makes me think about the necklace that from the episode with the which one was it? Not Dreamer. It was episode 9, A Father's Love. That maybe that was the necklace that she was talking about that her mother wore, because I think that that's the same church that they were talking about, the Lightless Flame. So I think that's the same organization. All right, now we're on episode 13 of the Magnus Archives. Alone. And we will get our timer. And counting back from... Oh, and there is our hour reminder at the top of the hour. It is 10 o'clock. Eastern Standard Time, so wherever you are in the world, if you're around that time, please take a moment to do everything that you need to do if you haven't already to prepare yourself to get ready for bed and into your dream state. Please make sure that your doors are locked, that you have a bottle of water or tea with you before bed, and lower your screen brightness so that if your body is ready, that you're able to go to sleep with ease. Alright, counting back from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I've had to start drinking my tea from a straw.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives. Episode 13. Alone.
I don't ever remember that episode at all. It's actually a pretty important one, too.
Right, let's try this.
Really? Does that thing even work? It must be 30 years old.
I know, but we have previously had some success using it to record statements that our digital recording software struggles with.
Yeah, well that's one way to put it. You need to get some better equipment.
Believe me, I have been trying. Still, tape recorder seems to work fine as a backup, and I can have it transcribed later. So for now, if you'd be so kind...
You're serious? You actually want me to tell my story into that rattling piece of junk? I see why no one takes you guys seriously.
You're under no obligation to speak to us.
No, I guess I'm just desperate. The last paranormal investigator I went to laughed at me when I suggested talking to you. Still, I guess you have to believe me.
Something like that.
Okay. From where we
He's
left
so
off?
grumpy.
Probably best to start over. Name, date, subject, etc. I'm not optimistic that any of the previous recording will be salvageable.
Fine. My name is Naomi Hearn, and I'm making a statement about the events following the funeral of my fiancé, Evan Lucas. The date is the 13th of January, 2016. To be honest, I'm not even sure I should be here. What happened was weird and alright. I can't think of a rational explanation for it, but I was distraught. I still am. I should go. I probably just imagined the whole thing. He's gone and that's all there is to it.
That's certainly possible. It might all be in your head. Though there is the matter of the stone.
That could be... or... I don't know. I just don't know what to think.
Take your time.
Wait, where are you going?
I was going to give you some privacy while you make your statement.
Okay, it's just... Could you stay, please? I don't want to be alone.
Very well. Let's start from the beginning.
All right. I guess the beginning would be when I met Evan. I've never really been the social type. I've always been more comfortable alone, you know.
My father died when I was 5 years old, and my mother spent so much time working to keep us fed that I hardly ever saw her. I wasn't bullied in school or anything like that. I mean, to be bullied, you need to be noticed, and I made sure that I wasn't. It was the same in secondary school, and even in uni up at Leeds. When everyone was moving out into shared houses for second year, I stayed in a nice cosy room for one in university accommodation. I've always just been happier alone. Well, maybe happier isn't quite the right word. I did get a bit lonely sometimes. I'd hear laughter coming from other rooms in my building, or see a group of friends talking in the sun outside, and maybe I'd wish I had something like that, but it never really bothered me. I knew my own company and was comfortable with it. I didn't need other people, and they certainly didn't need me. The only person who ever really seemed to worry about it was Pastor David. He worked in the chaplaincy, and I saw him occasionally when work or stress was getting to me. My mum's a Methodist, and I felt more comfortable talking to him than any of the secular counsellors. He used to tell me it wasn't natural for people to live in isolation, that we were creatures of community by nature. I remember he always used to say that he was worried I'd get lost. Back then I didn't know what he meant. I think I do now, though. Anyway, the point is that when I graduated 3 years ago, I left Leeds with a first in chemistry and no real friends to speak of, and that was fine by me. I got a job as a science technician down in Woking. It didn't pay well, and the children were a thick, entitled lot, but it was enough to live on and kept me close enough to London that I could apply for the various lab jobs that I actually wanted. It was interviewing for one of these where I met Evan. He was going for the same position as I was, lab assistant in one of the UCL biochemistry departments. He got the job, in the end, but I didn't care. He was so unlike anyone I'd ever met before. He started talking to me before the interview, and I amazed myself by actually talking back. When he asked me questions, I didn't feel uneasy or worried about my answers. I just found myself telling this stranger all about myself, without any self-consciousness at all. When he was called in for his interview, I actually felt a pang of loss, like nothing I've known before. All for a stranger who I'd barely met 10 minutes ago. When I came out of the building after my own, somewhat disastrous interview and saw him standing there waiting for me, I don't think I've ever been happier than in that moment. We went out, and dating gradually turned into living together. I'd had 2 boyfriends in the past, both short-lived relationships that ended abruptly. In both cases, they said it was because they never really felt like I wanted them around, and looking back, that was kind of true. With Evan, it was different. It never seemed like his being there stopped me being myself or crossed into spaces that I saw as my own. Everything about being with him felt so natural that when he told me he loved me, it only came as a surprise to realise that we hadn't said it already. He had friends as well, plenty of friends. How could he not? And he would take me out to meet them when I wanted to, and when I didn't, he let me be. After a year with him, I actually had what could perhaps be called a social life. And more than that, I didn't hate it. I always used to roll my eyes at people who said that their loved ones completed them. But I honestly can't think of any other way to describe how it felt to be with Evan. I proposed to him after only 2 years, and he said yes. I'll skip over the bit where he dies. It's only been a year, and I don't want to spend an hour crying into your crappy tape player. Congenital, they said. Some problem with his heart. Always been there, but never diagnosed. No warning. 1 in a million chance. Blah, blah, blah. He was gone, just gone, and I was alone again. There was no one I could talk to about it. All my friends had been his friends, and once he was gone, it didn't feel right to see them. I know I'm sure they wouldn't have minded. They would have said that they were my friends too, but I could never bring myself to try. It felt more comfortable, more familiar to be alone, as though Evan had just been some wonderful dream that I was now waking up from. I don't remember the week between his death and the funeral. I'm sure it must have happened, but I don't have any memory of it at all. After leaving the hospital, the next thing that is properly clear in my mind is walking into that big, austere house. I don't remember where it was. Somewhere in Kent, I think. and I must have been given the address by someone in Evan's family who had organised the funeral. It was strange. Evan never really talked about his family. He said he wasn't on good terms with them because they were very religious and he never had been. I'd never met or visited them or even been told their names, as far as I remember. But they must have known me enough to invite me, as I somehow ended up at the right place. Just as well they took on the responsibility for the funeral. I was in no fit state to organise anything. The house was very large and very old. It had a high gate separating it from the main road, which has the name Moorland House carved into the stone of the gatepost. I drove there alone, my old second-hand Vauxhall Astra complaining all the way. You remember that storm that hit at the end of last March? Well, I hardly noticed it. Thinking back, I really shouldn't have been driving at all, but at the time it barely registered. The trees were bending ominously when I finally parked at Moorland House, and I immediately lost the only respectful hat that I owned to the wind. Evan had once told me that his family had a lot of money, and looking at this place, I realised why the funeral was being held there. I could see round the side what appeared to be a well-kept mausoleum, the last resting place of Evan's ancestors, and soon, I guessed, of Evan himself. This thought set me crying again, and it was in that state, weeping, windswept and soaked through from the rain, that I saw the door open. I don't know what I expected from Evan's father. I knew he couldn't be anything like the easy, charming man I'd fallen in love with, but the hard-faced stranger that confronted me on the doorstep still came as a shock. It was like looking at Evan, but as if age had drained all the joy and affection from him. I started to introduce myself, but he just shook his head and pointed inside, to a door down the corridor behind him, and spoke the only words he ever said to me. He said, "My son is in there. He is dead." And then he turned and walked away, leaving me shaken, with no option but to follow him inside. The house was full of people I didn't know. None of the lovely, welcoming faces I'd come to know from Evan's friends could be seen among the dour figures of his family. Each wore the same hard expression as his father, and I might have been imagining it, but I could have sworn that when they looked at me, their eyes were full of something dark. Anger, maybe? Blame? God knows I felt guilty enough about his death, though I have no idea why. None of them spoke to me, or to each other, and the house was so quiet and still that at times it seemed like I could hardly breathe under the weight of the silence. Finally I came to the room where he was laid out. Evan, the man I was going to marry, was lying there in a shining oak casket that seemed too big for him somehow. The coffin was open, and I could see him, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. I realised I had never seen him wear a suit before. Like everything else in his death, it seemed utterly alien to the life that he had created for himself. I remember going to my father's funeral when I was very young. I remember seeing him lying there after the undertakers had done their business. My father had looked serene, peaceful, like he had calmly accepted the reality of his passing. It had comforted me as a child, though it had done little to blunt the acute sense of loss that I felt. There was none of that on Evan's face. In death, he seemed to have that same hardness and reproach that I saw on every one of the silent family that claimed him for their own. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like seconds, but when I turned around, I almost shrieked to see dozens of black-clad figures stood there, staring at me. The rest of the Lucas family was standing, waiting without a word, as though I was between them and their prey, which I suppose, in some ways, I was. Finally, an old man walked forward. He was small and hunched with age, his black suit hanging off his body like sagging flaps of skin. He spoke. "It's time for you to leave. The burial is a family affair. I'm sure you want to be alone." I tried to reply, but the
That
words
gave me
stuck in my throat.
goosebumps.
They stood there waiting for me to respond or to leave, and I realised the old man was right. I did want to leave, to be alone. I didn't care where I went, but I had to go, to get away from that awful place with its strange, quiet watchers. I ran past them and out into the storm. Inside my car, I just turned on the engine and began to drive. I didn't know where I was going and could barely see a thing through my tears and the driving rain, but it didn't matter. Just as long as I kept going, as long as I didn't have to stop and think about what had just happened. Looking back, the only thing that surprises me about the crash is that it wasn't bad enough to kill me. When I became aware of myself again, I realised I was in the middle of a field, quite a distance from the road. The tracks behind me showed where I had skidded into the dirt. Luckily, I hadn't hit anything or flipped over, but smoke billowed from the engine of my poor old Astra, and it was clear I wasn't going anywhere. It was dark, and the time on my dashboard said 12 minutes past 11. My phone said the same thing. I had arrived at Moorland House at 6 o'clock, as instructed. Had I been driving for hours, or had I spent even longer with Evan's body than I thought? I hadn't hit anything, so I couldn't have been knocked unconscious. Had I just been sitting there in my smoking car all that time? It didn't matter. The rain was beating down hard and I needed to get some help. I tried to call the emergency services or use the GPS on my phone, but the screen just said no service. I took a deep breath, trying to stifle panic, and got out the car. I was soaked through in less than 10 seconds as I struggled through the downpour towards the road. I could hear no sound except for the howling wind, and there were no headlights anywhere to be seen. Having no idea where I was, I made the decision to turn right and began to walk. I tried to use my phone again, but as I reached into my bag, I realised how much of the rain had soaked through. Pressing the power button only confirmed what I already suspected. My phone wasn't working. Anger washed over me, and all the bitterness and rage that had been building over the worst days of my life surged through me, and I threw the useless lump of plastic on the ground. The corner shattered as it hit the road, and then it bounced off the side and disappeared into the thick mud. I suddenly felt very cold as I stood there in the road, rain beating down, tears flowing freely and utterly alone. I kept walking, desperately hoping to see headlights in the distance, but there was nothing but darkness and the steady pounding of the rain on miles of empty countryside in every direction. I didn't have a watch, so without my phone, I have no idea how long I walked. The cold bit into my soaked funeral clothes, and I shivered, falling to my knees and just about giving up. No cars were coming, and I didn't have the first clue where I was going. It was then I noticed that the rain had stopped. Wiping the tears from my eyes, I saw that a fog had gathered around me, and I could no longer see more than a few feet in front of me. I kept walking, though, as the clinging mist made me feel somehow even colder. The fog seemed to follow me as I went, and seemed to swirl around with a strange, deliberate motion. You'll probably think me an idiot, but it felt almost malicious. I don't know what it wanted, but somehow I was sure it wanted something. There was no presence to it, though. It wasn't as though another person was there. It made me feel utterly forsaken. I started to run, following as much of the road as I could see, in the hopes of getting to the other side, but there seemed to be no end to it. I don't know exactly when the hard tarmac of the road became dirt and grass, but I realised after a few minutes that I had strayed off the path. I tried to backtrack, but it was gone. All that remained was the fog and the skeletal outlines of half-glimpsed trees. The dark lines of them bent away from me at harsh angles. But if I tried to approach them, then, rather than becoming clearer, the trees would disappear back into the hazy night and I would lose them. Kneeling down, I was surprised to realise that the ground I was now standing on was not wet. The hard, packed earth was damp from the creeping mist, but it did not appear to have been rained on. The despair I felt was quickly turning into fear, and I kept moving forward, further into the fog. I realised afterwards that the night should have been far too dark to see the fog. There were no lights there to show it, and the moon had been shrouded in storm clouds all night. But despite this, I could clearly see it. Shifting, slate grey and smelling of nothing at all. As I walked, I saw more shapes nearby. Dark slabs of stone, sticking out of the ground, leaning and broken. Gravestones. They spread out in all directions, and the gentle blurring of the mist did nothing to soften the hard weight of their presence. I did not stop to read them. I kept moving until I reached the centre of what I can only assume was a small cemetery, and there I found a chapel. The top of its steeple was lost in the gloom, and the windows were dark. I started to feel relief, as though I might have found some sign of life at last. I began to circle it, moving around to where I assumed the front doors were. As I went, I noticed that there was stained glass in the windows, but without any light from inside, I couldn't make out the design. Finally, I came to the front of the building, and I almost lost hope. Wrapped around the handles of the entrance was a sturdy iron chain. I would find no sanctuary here. I came very close to making a rash decision at that point. I started to shout, to scream for help, but the sound seemed muffled and disappeared almost as soon as it left my throat. No one heard me, but I continued shouting for some time, just to hear the noise, even if it did seem to die as soon as it touched the fog. It was useless, though, and as I finished, I felt the prickling damp flow in and out of my lungs. It was cloying and heavy, and I decided I had to do something. I started to look around the ground for the heaviest rock I could find. I was going to get inside that church, even if I had to break a window to do it. Anything to get out of the fog. I was sure that eventually someone would find me. I noticed that one of the graves had been slightly broken by age, and a small chunk of it could be seen on the ground. It had an engraving of a cross on it, and the weighty lump of stone now lay embedded in the graveyard soil. I bent down to lift it, but as I did so, I saw something that froze me in place. The grave was open, and it was empty. It wasn't dug up, exactly. The hole was neat, square, and deep, as though ready for a burial. At the bottom there was a coffin. It was open, and there was nothing inside. I backed away, and almost fell into another open grave behind me. I started to look around the cemetery with increasing panic. Every grave was open, and they were all empty. Even here, among the dead, I was alone. As I stared, the fog began to weigh me down. It coiled about me. Its formless damp clung to me and began to drag me gently, slowly towards the waiting pit. I tried to back away, but the ground was slick with dew and I fell. My fingers dug into the soft cemetery dirt as I looked around desperately for anything I could use to save myself, and my hand closed upon that heavy piece of headstone. It took all my self-control to keep a grip on that anchor as I slowly dragged myself away from the edge of my lonely grave. Flowing around me, the very air itself willed me inside, but I struggled to my feet. The image of Evan's family suddenly came into my mind, and I vowed to myself that they would not be the last human contact I ever had. I looked towards the chapel, and saw with a start that the door was now open, the heavy chain discarded on the steps in front. I ran to it as quickly as I could, crying out for help, but when I reached the threshold I stopped, and could only stare in horror. Through that door, where the inside of the chapel should be, was a field. It was bathed in sickly moonlight, and the fog rolled close to the ground. It seemed to stretch for miles, and I knew that I could wander there for years and never meet another. I turned away from that door, but as I looked behind me, I could have wept. Beyond the graveyard's edge lay that same field, stretching off into the distance. I had to make a choice, and so I began to run from that chapel, into the field behind me. I nearly fell into a hungry grave, but kept my balance well enough to get beyond them. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, and moving through it was getting harder. It was like I was running against the wind, except the air was completely still. I could hardly breathe as I inhaled it, and then, as I found myself in the middle of that open, desolate field, I heard something. It was the strangest thing, but as I tried to run, I could have sworn I heard Evan's voice call to me. He said, "Turn left." That's it. That's all he said. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's what he told me to do. And I did it. I turned sharply to the left and kept on running. And then, nothing.
That's when the car hit you.
Yes. I remember a second of headlights and then nothing until I woke up in the hospital.
I see.
So what do you think? Was it real?
Well, we'll need to do some investigation into a few of the details that you raised, but at first impressions I'd say it was only real insofar as trauma can have a very real effect on the mind. Beyond that, it's difficult to prove either way, but I would suggest you leave the stone with us so we can study it. And it would likely help you move past this unpleasant incident. Some time with a more qualified care professional might also...
I don't know what I expected, really.
We'll let you know if we find anything.
Oh, this is ridiculous. I can't believe I've wasted my time.
Statement ends. Following Ms. Hearn's statement, we did as much follow-up as we were able, which admittedly wasn't a lot. Evan Lucas did indeed pass away from heart failure on March the 22nd, 2015, and his body was taken by his family for burial. All requests to the Lucas family for information or interviews have been very firmly rebuffed. At roughly 1 in the morning, on the 31st of March, Ms. Hearn was involved in a collision with one Michael Getty. She had apparently run out into the road in front of Mr. Getty's car near Worms Hill in the Kent Downs. She was quickly taken to Sittingbourne Hospital and treated for concussion and dehydration. Her car was found abandoned in a field 5 miles away. There are no cemeteries matching Ms. Hearn's description anywhere near the road she was found, nor could there have been any fog given the incredibly high winds during the storm that night. I'd be tempted to chalk this one up to a hallucination from stress and trauma, if it wasn't for the fact that when she was hit, Ms. Hearn was found to be holding a piece of masonry. It appears to be a lump of carved granite with an engraved cross design. The style and size match what would conceivably be found atop a headstone, though we have been unable to trace its origin. Still attached to it is a small fragment of what we can assume would have been the marker itself. The only text that can be made out simply reads, "Forgotten."
Dang.
I've arranged for it to be transferred to the Institute's artifact storage. Recording ends.
Oh, I really enjoy how they hone in
The Magnus Archives is
on
a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution.
on the different types of fears that people can have. So obviously that one was like fear of being alone. I think they did that one really well. I don't remember. Just popped in. Yeah, the Lucas family introduction. Yeah. That's what I was thinking the whole time. I was just like, I had completely forgotten that episode. And I'm just like, they were so cold. But well, I don't want to. Spoilers. We'll get there. We have 200 episodes to make it through. But yeah, that episode's good. But the episode before that, I feel like I'm so disappointed in myself that I don't remember it at all. It's the first aid one, and it's the one where when you first watched it, you thought they were dead. I did! I'm so glad you remember. I was freaking out. So I still think that they're dead. was the first thing that I said to you. I was like, they were dead. She went somewhere and they were dead. Because it just, oh, yes, because of all the empty graves. Now I remember. Because when she says that she went and there was a bunch of empty graves in the mausoleum, it would have made sense. Yes, that they all came out of the grave. Oh my gosh. Wait, were they dead? Were they dead? Oh man. But I remember I had forgotten as well that the stone said forgotten on it. Like, oh man. That's like the ultimate, like, aloneness, right? Like, to be forgotten. Completely. Not just in death. Oh man. Alright. But oh yeah, so the episode 2 episodes before that. No, the episode before that, the alone one. I had forgotten about that episode too. Because now I'm trying to remember who is the person who was chanting that keys that he came into the hospital with this other person, and I can't remember who it was. But don't say it if it's a spoiler. Don't say it. All right. Oh, we're on piecemeal. Ooh, this is a good one, I think. They're all really good. I'm gonna say that the whole time. We're all through all 200 episodes. Every time we get to one, I'm like, oh, that's good. They're all they're all good. All right. Episode 14 of the Magnus Archives. Piecemeal. I think this one's a good one. I'm trying to remember. All right, countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lunch. Lunch.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives.
I have to fix the description. I started at episode 12.
Piecemeal.
I do think that this is a really good episode. I think this is one of the episodes that kind of freaked me out a little bit, if I'm being honest.
Statement of Lee Rentoul on the murder of his associate Paul Noriga. Original statement given May 29th, 2011.
Wait, do I remember this one?
Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Let's get one thing straight right off. This is not a goddamn confession, alright? If you go to the police with this, I will deny every word, and I know enough about the law to know that even if I spill my guts to you about all the horrible things I've done, it will count for nothing in court. It's not like you'll even be able to help me. My mate Hester said he came to you a few years back, been seeing ghosts and that, and you guys looked into it and told him it was some sort of noise messing with his head, infrasound or something, and he's fine now. I need that. I need you to tell me that it's just coincidence and my mind's playing tricks, and I need to not lose any more bits of me. So yeah, I killed that asshole Noriga, stabbed him in the throat and left him to bleed out on the dockside. Maybe that shocks you a bit, maybe not, but trust me when I say he had it coming. 8 years we worked together, and it was him that got carried away kicking McMullen's head in and moved it from assault to GBH. But sure enough, when we get picked up, he turns on me and I get pinned for it. 5 years I served because of him, while he walked free as you please. I'd say that I was due a bit of payback, and I certainly got it. It wasn't my first choice, though. I'm not stupid, and parole keeps you on a short enough chain that slitting Noriga's throat was not my top priority. Don't get me wrong, it was something I'd been itching to do for 5 goddamn years, but I wasn't in a rush. I had plenty of time to arrange something nasty for him, and I wanted him hurt more than I felt I had to do the deed myself. So when I got out in June last year, I bided my time and kept my ear to the ground. Tried to get in touch with him, but was told by the few friends we had in common that he wasn't interested in talking to me. He'd clearly done okay for himself in the years I'd been away and could afford some muscle to make sure I didn't bother him. I ended up with a couple of bruised ribs when I finally got tired of the runaround and tried to have it out with him properly. It was laying there, some grim side street in Lewisham of all places, that I came to the decision that if I was going to hurt this asshole, and I mean properly hurt him, I was going to have to think outside the box a bit. I decided to pay McMullen a visit. Before Noriga had gone to work on him, Toby McMullen was just some street punk. These days he was just a street punk who had trouble turning his neck. I've met plenty of born losers in my time. I mean, it's kind of a given in this business, but I've never met someone so intent on being a screw-up as McMullen. When I saw him, he was high as a kite and barely knew I was there, but you bet his eyes lit up when I mentioned Paul Noriga. It took hours to get anything useful out of that waste of skin, but eventually I pieced together his side of this sorry tale. Noriga had paid him a visit in the hospital, apparently, before the police had picked us up, and promised that if he fingered me for the assault, then he'd have all of the narcotics his little junky heart could dream of. Only once he was out of hospital and my conviction had gone through, it wasn't 2 days before McMullen was out on his arse again, and Noriga didn't want to know. Any idiot could have seen it would play out that way, but not poor, stupid Toby. Still, he'd been itching to get the knife in for almost as long as I had, and he had had the freedom to plan it. So I asked him if he had anything I could use. I shouldn't have been surprised when he suggested magic. Toby had always been into all of that mystical crap, even before the drugs. And if there was some half-baked New Age fad going round, you could bet you'd find it dribbling out of his mouth whenever he was coherent enough to actually talk. I punched him in the gut and turned to leave. He followed me, doubled over and struggling for breath, begging me to help him. He said he was serious, said it wasn't like the other stuff, said he knew someone with real power who could put the hurt to Noriga, but he just didn't have the money. I should have kept walking. I should have shaken him off. I should have beat him so bad he couldn't turn his neck the other way either. But I didn't. I stopped, and I listened to what that piece of human garbage had to say. I was an idiot. So Toby took me to see his friend Angela. He never gave me her second name. I asked him what it was, Wicca, voodoo, some crystal ball, but Toby said no, nothing like that. Said he didn't really know how it was supposed to work, but he had a girl a few months back had told him about Angela. Said she'd used her services on a particularly unpleasant ex-boyfriend. Apparently he'd disappeared, and they never found a body. So then I'm thinking maybe there's no magic there, just a killer with a shtick. But hey, if that was the case, it was fine by me, just as long as Noriga got done. When I finally met Angela, it was all I could do not to cave McMullen's head in. I'd just about convinced myself I was going to be meeting with a hardened killer, maybe one that kept a bunch of spooky Halloween crap around, but still someone who'd get the job done. I wasn't even put off when we pulled up to a well-kept suburban house in Bexley. When the door was answered by an old lady in a lilac dressing gown, I almost lost it. McMullen asked if she was Angela, speaking in a quiet voice, like he was actually scared of the geriatric fool. The old woman said yes, she was Angela, and asked us to come in. The house felt almost as old as its owner, faded floral print wallpaper, dark oak furniture, and threadbare carpets. The walls were covered with framed portraits, the sort you get in any cheap antique store or charity shop. Although as we went into the living room, I noticed something I didn't expect. They weren't paintings. They were jigsaw puzzles, each completed and framed. And sure enough, when we sat down on the worn cloth sofa, there in front of Angela was another jigsaw, half finished. I've got no problem with the elderly, and if they want to throw away their last years putting together a damn picture, then I'm sure not going to stop them. But it wasn't exactly going to kill Noriga, was it? I was so angry at this massive waste of my time that when she offered us a cup of coffee, I almost put Macmullen face first through the glass table in front of us. I grunted something which Angela apparently took as a yes please, and so a few minutes later there I was drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug that this doddering old ass clearly hadn't thought to wipe the dust off of. When she asked if I wanted Paul Noriga dead, I nearly choked. She asked it very matter-of-factly, like it was a question on some form she knew the answer to but had to fill in anyway. I glanced at Toby, who nodded at me, and I thought, what the hell? I might as well play along. So I said yes. Yes, I did want him dead. And more than that, I wanted him to suffer. Angela smiled when I said that, a warm smile that suited her round face, and said that wouldn't be a problem. I started to explain the situation, but she waved it away and told me that Toby had filled her in on all the details, and that there was just one thing she needed from me that he couldn't provide. I started to tell her that I wasn't paying for someone's grand to take out a hard case like Noriga, but she said no. She wasn't after money. She said that she was well compensated for the service she provided, and that all she needed from me was an object. Anything that I had taken from Noriga. Not a gift, she said, staring into my eyes with a look that I recognized from years of working with very unpleasant people. It wouldn't work if it was a gift. At this point I was starting to feel uneasy. Not scared, alright? I wasn't scared of this old woman, but being around her was bad. I don't know how else to say it. She was bad. You've got to understand, I know dangerous. I understand dangerous. Hell, I am dangerous. This was something else. But I wanted Paul Noriga dead so badly. 5 years ago, just before we'd been picked up by the police, I'd borrowed his lighter. It was a battered old Zippo, used to have a picture of a topless woman on it, but now that was almost worn away. After he turned on me in questioning, I didn't feel much like returning it to the treacherous backstabber, so I held on to it. I hadn't thought much of it, but here it was, still in the pocket of my jacket all those years later. I handed it to Angela and she gave me that look again and told me that it would work just fine. And then we left. Angela told us not to worry about it, that Paul Noriga wasn't going to be bothering us for much longer. We just had to wait until she was finished. Finished with what exactly she didn't say. She didn't need to. We knew whatever it was, we were probably better off not knowing. The waiting came hard, though. After he'd had me roughed up, it seemed like Noriga had decided I wasn't worth worrying about. I'd see him walking those streets like he owned them, his pair of leg breakers in tow, and I knew there was nothing that I could do about it. He knew it too. So I waited. And I waited. I waited for the shot, or the knife, or the poison, or the whatever would end him for good. It never came. Days turned into weeks, and there he still was, as cocksure as ever. I was patient. God, I was patient. But after 3 weeks, I had almost written off that useless old bag as a time-wasting con job. I was going to give her one more week. Just one. But then something came up that I couldn't ignore. Word came down that Noriga was meeting someone at the docks, some fence by the name of Salesa. The man dealt mainly in stolen art and curios, valuable stuff, and was paranoid as hell, which meant Noriga was going to be there alone. It might have been a trap, sure, but I'd been sitting on my ass waiting for him to magically drop dead for so long that if there was even a chance it was on the level, I had to take it. Turns out it was true. and went off smoother than I could have hoped for. I found the warehouse a few hours before the meet and staked out a good spot. Then I waited. Salesa turned up first, a big Samoan guy with close-cropped hair, flanked by 4 men in dark suits, who carried a square wooden crate between them. They went into the warehouse and, sure enough, 5 minutes later there he is, that snake. He was alone and seemed to be limping slightly. He headed inside through the same door, leaving it unlocked. Perfect. There was no point me going in yet. I wasn't keen to get my head kicked in by Salesa's goons, so I just watched, my hand gripping the hilt of a combat knife I bought at an army surplus store I know is happy to sell off the books. It was almost an hour later that Salesa and his men left, still carrying that box. They didn't look happy, but I could have given a damn. As soon as they were round the corner, I headed inside as quietly as I could. And there he was, leaning up against a pile of bricks, smoking. I started to move towards him, but as I got near, he must have heard me and turned around. He started to say something about reconsidering and lowering the price, when he realized I was not Salesa. Then a look passed over the face of Paul Noriga that I will treasure forever. No matter what happens to me, the memory of that look of panicked terror will stay with me. He turned to run, but whatever was wrong with his leg meant he tripped over the bricks instead. I grabbed him by the collar, my knife already out, and dragged him up. I had always been the stronger of the two of us, and he knew he couldn't fight me. Holding up his hand, he begged me to wait, to listen. I noticed that his hand was missing a couple of fingers, old wounds that had long healed over, though I didn't remember seeing them before. It didn't matter. I could hear the blood pumping in my head, and nothing was going to stop me taking my revenge. He begged for mercy as I plunged the knife into him once, twice, 3 times, again and again and again. I stabbed that backstabber until, finally, I let him fall. He landed on the floor hard, dead weight, his head making a thick, cracking sound as it hit the bricks, and blood began to pool on the floor around his body. As the rage started to fade and my breathing returned to normal, I took a second to look over poor, dead Paul Noriga and saw something that seemed to have been knocked loose when his head hit the bricks. Picking it up, I saw it was a glass eye. I looked back at the corpse and sure enough there was a gaping hole where his left eye should have been. When had that happened? He certainly had both eyes when we had worked together, and all 10 fingers as well. He'd also had all his teeth, where now I saw gaps all over that dead, smiling face. I shivered, though I don't know why. I won't go into detail about how I went about disposing of the body. Just trust me when I say that even if the cops did find any piece in Origa's corpse, they wouldn't be able to pin it on me. And life went on. His boys did come looking for me when their boss didn't return, but I knew to lay low for a while, and soon enough they realized that if he was gone, they weren't getting paid either way and moved on. And so I had my revenge. And that should have been the end of the story. But it wasn't. It was 5 days after I killed Noriga that I found the first package. I was on Tottenham Marshes near the reservoir on business you don't need to know, and I came to a metal bridge over one of the streams there. Now this wasn't a place I went often, and I don't think I'd ever crossed that bridge before in my life, but there, lying in the centre of it, was a small box. It was wrapped in brown paper and string like an old-fashioned Christmas present, and had my name printed on it in clear letters. Lee Rentoul, for immediate consideration. Obviously I was a little bit freaked out at this, but not as freaked out as when I opened it. Inside was a black cardboard box, full of cotton wool, and a single severed finger. It was obviously some sort of threat. Some punk reckoned they could put a scare on me. No chance. I threw the finger into one of the canals and set the box on fire before throwing it in a bin. I headed home quickly, keeping my attention all around me and my hand on my knife. I was so busy looking behind me I didn't see the hole in front of me, and I tripped. As I fell forward, I felt a hot pain in the hand that had been on my knife. You guessed it. Falling had caused the blade to slice clean through my little finger. I'm not too proud to admit that I screamed at this. I tore up my shirt trying to make a bandage to stop the bleeding, at least until I could get to a hospital. But as I began to wrap it up, I noticed that it wasn't actually bleeding. The wound was closed. It had healed, like it had happened years ago. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to do. So I just went home. I wasn't getting my finger back, so I figured I could try to deal with it after a decent night's sleep. There was another box at my flat. Same as before. This one contained 2 toes. I tried to ignore it and keep my foot well away from any knives, but I was trying to adjust the settings on my flat screen when it fell off the wall, hit my right foot, and, well, have you figured it out yet? That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I lost 4 more fingers to accidents, most of my toes. This eye I managed to put out on a goddamn fence post. I've lost count of the number of teeth gone, and believe me when I say that you don't want to know how I lost the hand. Each time, a box wrapped in brown paper. Lee Rentoul, for immediate consideration. I've tried everything. Once I thought I managed to outsmart it, spent the day in my bedroom, nothing sharp, no edges. I'd taken out everything except the mattress. It didn't matter. I woke the next morning with an agony in my foot far sharper than any knife could cut, and the big toe missing, just like the one I'd received the morning before. I knew it was Angela. Of course I did, I'm not thick. Whatever curse she'd laid on Noriga must have passed to me. I went over there, you know. Went to confront that old... And you know what happened? She let me in. She was nice, civil, offered me another cup of coffee. I told her where to stick it. Demanded, asked, begged her to stop whatever was happening to me. You know what she did? She shrugged. She just shrugged. Told me that some hungers are too strong to be denied, whatever the hell that means. So I went for her. I was going to strangle the life out of that curse-flinging bag of bones. But as I reached for her, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I know that's how I lost the hand. I know I chewed it off. Look, it doesn't matter. I just need your help. I need this to stop. I don't know how, but this is your area, right? This is what you do. You look into this weird ghost crap, right? Well, this is the definition of weird ghost crap, and I need you to help me. I need you to save me from whatever is happening. I don't have much time. I got a box this morning, a few hours before I came here. It was a tongue. Statement ends. It doesn't look like this case was ever properly followed up. According to the supplementary notes, shortly after making his statement, Mr. Rentoul became violent towards Institute staff, and in the ensuing incident there was an accident. No details are given, but apparently it required Mr. Rentoul's hospitalization. I'm reminded of a somewhat tasteless joke about loose tongues. He did not return to the Institute afterwards, and his statement was archived. According to the arrest records Sasha uncovered, Mr. Rentoul was telling the truth about the somewhat checkered past of himself and his associate, Paul Noriga, with extensive files on both of them. The last listed interaction between the police and Mr. Noriga is 2 months before Mr. Rentoul's statement, and since then, no sign can be found of him in police records, or indeed anywhere else. I sent Martin to look into this Angela character. Not that I want him to get chopped up, of course, but someone had to. Apparently he spent 3 days looking into every woman named Angela in Bexley over the age of 50. he could not find anyone that matches the admittedly vague description given here, though he informs me that he had some very pleasant chats about jigsaws. Useless ass. Tim has done his best to try and hunt down Mr. Rentoul and see if we can contact him for a follow-up interview or evaluation, but it looks like he disappeared shortly after making this statement. We were able to find his old landlord, though, who said that Mr. Rentoul vanished in early April of 2011, leaving many unpaid bills and no forwarding address. He said that when he had gone to clear out the flat, he'd been surprised to find that there was no furniture left. All that remained, he said, were hundreds and hundreds of small cardboard boxes. Recording ends.
He's so
The
mean,
Magnus
dude.
Archives is a podcast.
He's so mean. He said I didn't want him to get chopped up. Patience is key. What is the word to even describe his, like, John's demeanor? It's just like so, it's just like an ass. Oh man. So I guess when he killed the guy, that the spell passed on to him. Casual disdain. He was gonna send Martin to get chopped up. Oh, the jigsaw puzzles make sense. I was like, that's why I like this show. Like, every little detail means something. And I was like, a lady just likes puzzles. Oh my gosh. The next episode is episode 15, Lost John's Cave. I didn't want him to get chopped up. He was playing for the man's demise. He would not have felt bad if Martin had started disappearing in little bits. Oh man, alright. I gotta stop laughing. Alright. Ooh, this one's good too. When we get to the end of these, I'm gonna go through every single episode of the listening party. There's a lot of bits. Too soon. But yes. When we get to the end of all these, I'm gonna go back through all of the listening party episodes. I'm just gonna cut and paste all the all the moments of being like, oh, this one's good. Oh, this one's really good. And it's just gonna be 200 clips of me being like, oh, this one's really good. Because they're all really good. Oh man. I need him to not have such casual disdain. Alright, countdown starting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why is the streamer dying of laughing at the stream? Leave me alone. It's what is
Rusty
the
inappropriate
Quill
laughter called?
The Magnus
It's
Archives.
that. laughing at a literal horror show. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm hiding my fears. Never.
Episode 15. Lost John's Cave.
This one actually is really good. They all are good. And there's not that much to laugh about in this one. I actually teared up. Not just trivial things. People get
Statement
chopped up
of Laura
into
Popper
bites.
regarding her experience
Snacks.
exploring the 3 counties system of caves with her sister Elena Sanderson. Original statement given November the
Okay,
9th,
focus.
2014. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Caving has always been one of my hobbies.
I'm serious.
My main hobby, really. All the equipment can get quite costly after a while, and I don't earn enough to have more than one expensive activity like that in my life. Elena, my sister, came along with me on a trip a few years back. She'd lost her job and her house in quick succession and was staying with me. I thought it would cheer her up. It did, and we've been doing it ever since. Stupid idea, really. I wish I'd left her crying on the sofa. At least then she'd still be alive. We didn't really have the money to actually go potholing all that often, so I spent a lot of time reading and planning and just looking at stuff online. We averaged maybe a cave a year. Elena was never quite as into it as I was, though. Don't get me wrong, she was no claustrophobe, and I wasn't forcing her to follow me into the darkness on threat of a family rift, but she mainly enjoyed the climbing. And I always ended up going a little bit deeper than she wanted. I think, to be honest, she would have preferred to get her exercise under the open sky, or, failing that, in an above-ground gym. Maybe we should have tried cliffs or a climbing wall, but caving was our thing. It had helped her when she was in a bad place, and she knew how much I loved it. She also wasn't too keen on the scrapes and bruises you always get on expeditions. She used to joke that it felt like the earth itself was trying to kick her ass. If only she had known. We did have fun, though, and she always chose to come along. I never forced her to be there. I never did that. We'd done some of the 3 counties cave system before, a short trip of only a couple of hours into the Rift Pot caves. The whole system is huge, though. I mean, there's a reason it's called the 3 counties system, so there was plenty more to explore, and we'd had so much fun the first time that I wanted to try it from a different angle. We were going to go in through the Death's Head hole, then travelling through Lost John's Cave as far as Gavel Pot before heading back. The prospect of this excited me, as in order to travel between Lost John's Cave and the Gavel Pot system, we were going to have to do some cave diving. I had never done cave diving before, and neither had Elena, although she told me that the prospect spooked her less than some of the squeezes we'd had to do to get there. We made all the arrangements, got our permits in order with the CNCC, and had my husband, Alistair, note down all the details in case anything went wrong. You never go caving unless someone knows where you're headed and what your plan is. I had also done as much research into our route as possible, as I had no intention of straying from the well-explored, thoroughly charted caves. I was never much of a pioneer, if I'm being honest, and I was happy to stay to the main route. No, what I used to love about caving was the feeling of being deep inside the earth, the cold, solid walls folding in around me. It always used to feel like they were keeping me safe, though it doesn't feel like that anymore. It was Saturday, June 14th we went. I had taken the Friday before off work to prepare, and was planning to spend Sunday nursing well-earned bruises. Elena and I drove up to Lancashire, towards Death's Head Hole. I live in Manchester, so it wasn't too long a trip. We parked up at Lech Fell, the closest you could legally park. I was surprised to see that we were the only ones there when we arrived. It was a sunny day in late spring, and the weather was meant to be clear for days, with no chance of rain making the caves too dangerous. It was a perfect day for caving, but it seemed we were the only ones taking advantage of it. Death's Head Hole is not nearly as impressive or intimidating as its name suggests. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you might end up missing it entirely. When we went, much of it was covered in wild plants and bracken. It was barely larger than we were, and I remember at the time the phrase, "a perfect fit," came into my head unbidden. Still, the resin anchors were in good condition, and we hooked up and descended our ropes without incident, despite a few unexpected twists in the pothole. It was a bright day. It was almost noon when we went down, so the light filtered a lot further in than I would have expected. It was some time before we had to turn on our headlamps, but eventually we did so. By the time we hit the bottom, there was none of that sunshine left to be seen, and the silent darkness of the cave swallowed us. Beneath our feet, the gentle waters of the underground stream ran their course, as they had for thousands of years, undisturbed by the rough tread of humanity, and we followed them. It was a much gentler descent than that which we had come in with, but it was very slippery, and I was glad to have invested in a waterproof map case, although it made it slightly harder to read at times. Elena stood back to let me have my ritual. There was something I always did when I first entered a cave, and that was to take a moment to turn off all the lights and place both my hands upon the cold, earthen walls. I remember once when I was a child, we went on a school trip to White Scar Cave up in Yorkshire. It was a lovely, safe, accessible cave, and was absolutely beautiful, which I suppose is why it was popular for such trips. After we'd been down there for a few minutes, the guide led us much deeper, and told us to stand very quietly. She turned off the lights to show us children what true darkness is like. I had never seen anything like it. It was such a pure black, so encompassing, and in the warmth of the underground I found myself full of a joy I've never forgotten. Even among a class of 30 schoolchildren, I felt like the only presence that mattered was the cave. Ever since then, I would always take a moment on any potholing trip to do the same, and feel again that utter darkness, with no sound but the gentle flowing river and my own breathing. I don't think it's an uncommon practice, actually, but I rarely went caving with anyone other than Elena, and while she indulged me, I don't think she ever really got anything out of it. We turned our lights back on and began to head deeper into the cave. I had a map, which we began to follow as closely as we could. I'm quite experienced in these things, but even I find it hard sometimes to match the irregular lines and angles of the underground passages to the often abstract shapes written into the map. There were several junctions that were significantly smaller than the map would seem to show, and the point of entry into Lost John's cave was what we would call a squeeze. It wasn't on the map, but it seemed to be the only way through. Now, most passages you find yourself travelling through when caving are much smaller than would normally be comfortable for people to move through. After all, they were eroded by often tiny streams of water and minor tectonic events, so accommodating humans was never high on their list of priorities. A squeeze is something different, though. A squeeze can be a hole less than a foot wide, sometimes going on for a long way, the rock pressing in on all sides of you and your helmet banging whenever you try to turn your head. In a particularly bad squeeze, there are parts where the walls and ceiling are so close that you can't move your arms or bend your legs to push forward, and you just have to squirm your way to the other side like a worm. This was a particularly bad squeeze. Near the end, it got so bad that if Elena hadn't gone in first, I would have told her to go back and forget Lost John's cave. About halfway through, I realized that it was far tighter than I had imagined. I called ahead to make sure Elena had made it out okay. She called back, told me it was a hard one, but she was fine. I wanted to answer her, but by that point the rock was so close around me it was stopping me from doing anything but holding my breath and willing myself forward. A hand grasped me firmly on the shoulder and pulled me through. Just like that, I was out. Elena gave me a smirk as if to comment on the fact that she had made it through unassisted, and I, the true cave aficionado, had needed a hand. I wanted to shoot back some pointed comment about her being more slender than me, but by the time I had got my breathing under control again, the anger had died down, and I managed a weak smile. We made our way through the cave until we came to the cathedral. It's a large, arching cave, quite breathtaking, though it requires a couple of sheer drops to access, one of about 40 feet. We had experience and equipment enough to make quite light work of it, though, and soon we were beneath the cathedral, in what is imaginatively called the crypt. We stopped here for a rest and a bite to eat, and Lena told me an interesting thing about Lost John's cave. While I had been concerned with finding maps and as much information as I could on getting through, she told me she had been looking into the history of the place. She said everyone puts the apostrophe in the wrong place when talking about Lost John's cave. As the story goes, it was two men, both named John, who were the first to delve deep into the cave. They went too far, though, and their candles had gone out. They lost their way together in the sprawling labyrinth of tunnels and never emerged. Elena said she thought it was quite sweet in a strange sort of way, and joked that if she ever got trapped underground, she'd want it to be with me. I smiled and nodded, though secretly the thought appalled me. It wasn't at the thought of being entombed down there. At the time it didn't seem like such an awful fate, but the thought of having to spend my last days with Elena was a bit too much. I'm sorry, that's a horrible thing to say about the dead. I loved my sister, and I loved spending time with her. But to be lost beneath the earth is such an intensely private thing. Maybe she realized that at the end. After our brief stop, we made our way down through the dome. It was beautiful, and this was the part that I had been dreading, as all the experienced cavers I had talked to had said that this was the hardest descent. It went easily. Very easily, actually, and at the time I remember getting a weird feeling, like I was being swallowed. Finally, we made it through the shale cavern and into the master cave. As we stood there, I felt anticipation and trepidation in equal measure. Before us lay the passage filled with the still water of the sump. We were about to have our first cave dive. I had always been told by experienced cave divers that you never judge the distance correctly. The first few times you try to surface, you will always hit your head on the stone above, so it's best to try and not be too alarmed by it. I reminded Lena of this as we got our equipment ready, and she told me she remembered, and then surprised me by asking to be the first one to go through, saying something or other about conquering fears. I said yes, why not, and let her go through. As I stood there alone, waiting, I began to feel something I had never before felt this far underground. I began to feel uneasy. It was as silent as it had ever been, but there was something else there beneath the silence, almost like a whisper. I shook the feeling off when it came time to follow Elena and dived into the pool. It wasn't far to the junction which would lead us onto the gavel pot. I pressed myself through the narrow space, half swimming, half climbing, until I thought I had gone far enough and attempted to surface. Clunk. My helmet hit lightly against the roof of the tunnel. Fine, that was as expected. I kept swimming another few meters and tried again. Clunk. That gave me a nasty shock, as I should have been well past the end of the first tunnel. I kept going until I reached the end of a subterranean waterway and went towards the surface. Clunk. I started to panic. Was this a dead end? There was no further I could go. Where was Elena? She couldn't have come back past me. The tunnel was far too narrow. In desperation, I tried to come up one more time. I broke the surface to see Elena laughing to herself and holding a rock over the part of the water where I had been trying to emerge. I swore at her violently, not sure whether to hit her or join in her laughing. She apologized, but said she had seen the rock and couldn't resist, as I was always going on about the helmet banging on the roof. I sat there, suddenly drained. The adrenaline of my panic seemed to have sapped much of my energy, and I think my sister could see that, but she didn't press me to go on. We both knew that the passage through from this junction to the gavel pot itself was a much longer dive, and neither of us was really up to it. We just sat there for a while in silence. It had taken longer to get this far than we had planned, so I suggested going back the way we came rather than continuing to go deeper into the cave. Elena agreed, but as I turned away she asked me how lost I was, in a low, grating voice. I snapped back that we weren't lost at all, that I'd followed the map exactly. And she just gave me this look like she didn't understand what I was talking about. I shrugged and told her that I would go first on the way back, and she agreed. I was eager to get back and be above ground in a way that I had never been before. I got my equipment ready and dived back into the water, heading back towards Death's Head Hole. That's when everything started to go really, really wrong. To begin with, the water didn't end. I tried to surface as I had on my first time through, and again there was that clunk as my helmet hit the roof of the tunnel. I moved on and tried again, but still no luck. I began to fight down the rising alarm, told myself that the tunnel had a definite end and I just had to reach it. But it just kept going. No light, no surface, nothing but this cramped waterway pressing on every side, waiting to claim me. I don't know how long I was desperately swimming forward, but I almost screamed with relief when I reached my hand and felt it break the surface of the water. It wasn't the cave I expected. What stretched before me was a tunnel even smaller than the waterlogged one I had left. I scrambled forward into it, not because I wanted to go on into that unknown passage, but because I was worried about Elena being able to get out of the water behind me. I must have taken a wrong turn, except that didn't make sense. I hadn't turned at all, and more than that, there weren't any turns or junctions in this part of the cave. I had checked all the maps of this area over and over, and they all put it as a straight line. I waited, wanting to talk to my sister when she surfaced and discuss where to go from here. She didn't emerge. I don't know how long I lay there. It was too cramped to check the time, but it felt like hours. I wanted to go back and check, but I couldn't even turn around to see. I just waited for a splash that never came. I decided to go on, press forward until I at least found somewhere wide enough that I could turn. As I crawled on, I scraped against the jagged rocks until I felt them pressing into my bare skin where my clothes had ripped. I can deal with it when I'm out, I kept thinking, but the passage just got smaller and smaller, until at last I couldn't move any further. I finally accepted that I was going to have to try and squeeze back the way I had come without even turning round. I started to shuffle backwards, and my feet touched against solid rock. The tunnel was gone. It was then that I screamed, and my light went out. I said earlier that I enjoyed the pure dark of the cave. I was wrong. I had never truly known a darkness like this. Unable to move, barely with breathing space enough to cry for help. Even as I lay there, it felt as though the walls pressed me further, and I knew that the stone I had always believed to be my friend and protector was going to entomb me here. In the distance, I saw the faintest point of light. It looked like a candle flame, far down the tunnel, and so weak that it lit nothing but itself. It grew closer, but any hope it might have given me quickly died as it grew. It was coming towards me so slowly, and deep down I knew that it was of this place. It meant me harm. As it got closer, I saw the pale hand that held it, and I heard something. It was Elena. It sounded far off and muffled, but I was sure she was calling for help. I shut my eyes for all the good it did in that place, and tried desperately to will it all away. When I opened my eyes again, the light was still there, but it had changed somehow. It seemed brighter, and as I looked, I realized it was no longer coming from a candle. I could hardly believe it, but it looked like daylight. With every last ounce of strength I possessed, I pushed myself forward. Had I been climbing this whole time? My clothes were ragged and torn, my skin scraped and bloody, but after nearly an hour, I broke onto the surface through a small opening, not in any of the maps. I breathed in fresh, cool air, and I screamed as long and loud as I could. That was how Alistair and the cave rescue team found me. Apparently I'd been underground for almost 24 hours, and he had called in the cave rescue service.
That is
I
terrifying.
was well cared for as I waited for news of Elena. My wounds were treated, and I was given food and water. It took another day before the rescue team told me what I think I already knew. There was no sign of her anywhere. I never saw her again, and she was added to the list of fatalities, so I suppose that's an end of it. I haven't been underground since, and I don't intend to. Statement ends. This is a strange one. I have rarely come across a statement written with such conviction, yet where so many of the details are provably false. The CNCC have no record of Ms. Popham getting a permit for this expedition, and the number of other permits they issued for June 14th would indicate that they certainly weren't the only ones in the cave that day. Beyond that, Death's Head Hole and Lost John's Cave are, as Ms. Popham pointed out, well documented in layout, and according to Sasha's reckoning, the route she described is borderline nonsensical. What is true is that on 15th of June, the Yorkshire Dales Cave Rescue Organisation was contacted by Mr. Alistair Popham, who told them his wife and sister-in-law had gone caving the day before and had not returned. I sent Tim to check the details. Martin declined to help with this investigation as he's a bit claustrophobic. And he found some more bizarre discrepancies. Ms. Popham was not found above ground as she claimed. She was found a few yards from the bottom of Death's Head Hole, unresponsive and kneeling next to a small pile of burned-out candles. Alistair Popham claims not to have seen any such things being packed. She only came out of this stupor when brought above ground, at which point she started shouting about her sister Elena, demanding they go and save her.
Sweet dreams, dear.
There is also the matter of the recording. She does not mention it in her statement at all, but Ms. Popham took a camera with her into the cave system. It was never claimed back from the CRO after her rescue, and Tim managed to gain enough access to copy the footage. Best not to ask how, I think. Most of it is mundane footage of Ms. Popham and her sister cave climbing, which seemed to match her statement. But the last recording is somewhat alarming. The timestamp puts it at just past 2 o'clock in the morning of June 15th. It is completely black, though whether this is because it was in a pitch-dark cave or simply because the lens cap was still on is unclear. The audio is what concerns me. And here I will play a sample. The video is 2 hours and 43 minutes long, and the audio remains consistent throughout. No sign of Elena Sanderson has been found in the 2 years since her disappearance, and I have made the decision not to follow up our findings with Miss Popham. Recording ends.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons
That one actually kind of terrified me when I listened to it. I've never been cave diving, and I'm not exactly sure what the procedures are, because I was trying to imagine this in my mind when I was listening to it, that they go into the mouth of a cave, but I didn't realize that you descend down so much. So now Now I actually want to watch some videos about cave diving and how I'm assuming that these historical markers that they're talking about are actual real places that are in the UK area. But I guess I'd have to watch a video to understand like how are they getting through these very like small tight places and what that actually looks like. So hopefully someone has some GoPro some GoPro footage to help me clarify what that's actually like. All right. Episode 16 of the Magnus Archives. Depends on the cave layout. Some are ones you can walk into. Others are just a hole in the ground. So if it's just a hole in the ground, like you just go down or you like crawl in. Whenever I think of a cave, I think of like a big mouth and the opening of, a mountain or a hill. And I never think of it descending or going below the earth. Why am I thinking of your short story? That cave. Yeah, I will actually have to look up some footage of what cave diving is like, because I don't really have very good visuals right now. It sounds terrifying though from the way that the story describes it. If it really gets like that close and that tight, it's like climbing a mountain, but on the inside. On the inside, we descend. Alright, episode 16 of the Magnus Archives. Arachnophobia. Let's see, this one... Oh, I want to get to 17. And then I think we'll stop for the night, because I think that's a good stopping point. Let me see. Ooh, I wonder if we can make it to... If we can make it to 19, or 18 actually, because 19 and 20 are a two-parter. So we don't want to break those up. Let's see how we feel after 17. I think we'll probably stop at 17. How long have we been going? We're at 2.5 hours right now, so that will push us to 3.5 hours. If we do episode 18, that should sit us... Don't know. I was so excited when I got to 20, but also I was so sad because I was like, oh my gosh, we're almost to the end. So I know when I really like something, when I notice like the incremental decrease in my excitement for discovering a series or a show, because I realize the more that I get through the show, that the closer I get to the end, and then I won't be able to watch it again. But you still can. But I don't know, it's like the initial enjoyment of a really good show or a book or something. Sometimes it's nothing is as good as like the first taste of something. But yeah. Alright. 16. Let me make sure the timer's good. I did reset it. Alright, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives. Episode 16, Arachnophobia.
I don't like the bugs. If they're outside, they're fine. I do try to transport them outside if I find them inside though. Unless it's something like a hunter spider or something ridiculously just no.
Statement of Carlos Viteri regarding his arachnophobia and its manifestations. Original statement given April 9th, 2015. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the
Don't
Magnus
make me
Institute,
feel bad.
London. Statement begins. I hate spiders. I know, everyone hates spiders. Anytime there's any list of the top however many fears, they're always up there. And whole horror franchises have been built on the basic premise that people hate spiders.
What a great introduction.
But not like me. Not like this. It's not the sight of a spider that gets me, not the legs or the eyes or even the webs they leave behind with only the drained corpse of their insect victims still inside. It's the presence of a spider, the knowledge of its being somewhere near, waiting to crawl on you, and all the warning you get, that gentle tickle of its legs as it climbs upon you. I'm not explaining myself very well. Let me try and phrase it in a different way. I can watch any number of films about the things, documentary or horror, it doesn't matter. I can read books on them. I can stare at close-up pictures of their weird spider faces all day long, and there's hardly a shudder from me. But I had to move from my last house after discovering how many spiders made a home in my garden. I walked out there one day with the intention of smoking a cigarette, sat on the rusty garden furniture that had come with the place, and looked up. There it was, stretched between two large branches, silhouetted against the sky it sat. Objectively speaking, the thing was tiny, couldn't have been more than half an inch leg to leg. But up there, suspended high above me, its body
I had to
black
look at my
against
finger.
the slate-grey sky, filled me with a sickening dread. I leapt up and started to head back inside, but as I did, my eyes flicked wildly around the rest of the garden, and everywhere they came to rest, I saw more lurking spiders, more webs. There were dozens that I could see, which meant there must be hundreds
No!
more I could not. There was no way I could live there after that. How could I sleep, knowing how many crawling horrors moved and twitched and spun their filth
That was
just
a good
wall
episode.
away? I'm not a fool. I know that all gardens contain spiders. Every single one is filled with them, nestled in any crevice or hiding spot they can find. But now I knew. I had seen them in their spindly multitudes, and I could not unknow how many were there. I could not stop thinking of when winter would come and they would seek to find a way into the warmth of my home. So I had to move. Renting in London moves very quickly, which is a pain if you're looking to find exactly the right place to live. But if you just need to get out and into a place as far away from a garden as possible, and you aren't choosy, it can be sorted out very fast indeed. I found a place in Boothby Road in Archway. While nearby Elthorne Road was full of houses and gardens, no doubt infested with spiders, my building was surrounded by concrete driveways and parking spaces. The only vegetation were a few window boxes the other residents kept. The place was old, but had been kept clean enough that I didn't need to worry about hidden webs, and the rooms, though small, were open enough that I could keep an eye on all corners. I was on the second floor, so any 8-legged intruder would have something of a climb to access it. although I was acutely aware of the distance a spider can shoot its web when it wants to get somewhere. The building was also quite happy with pets, so I got a cat. I had heard from a friend who had a pair of them that they have a habit of catching spiders and eating them, slowly and torturously. This sounded good to me, so I invested in an older tabby from a local shelter called Major Tom. This is all a lot of superfluous information, I know, but you have to understand the lengths I went to, how little I would tolerate a spider to live in my presence, to fully grasp how unnatural it was, what happened to me, what is still happening to me. I saw a spider about 3 months ago. Not unusual, certainly not as unusual as I would like. Even with all my precautions, they still managed to get into my home once a month or so. My normal course of action is to immediately flee the room and leave Major Tom inside to deal with it, returning after a few hours. In all previous cases, this had worked fine. I believe Major Tom definitely ate the majority of them, and those spiders that had simply fled back into the shadows, well, I can trick myself into believing they also suffered such a fate. It may be that my grey feline companion never actually ate any of them, but he was a fine enough placebo that such a thought didn't concern me as much as it might. I remember that month there had been a few of them. Our building had acquired something of an infestation of some sort of insect I didn't recognize, small, silvery worms, almost like maggots, but slightly longer, and I assumed that they provided a good meal for the 8-legged little monsters.
It went by so fast.
This spider was different.
Shit.
I felt it the moment I laid eyes on the thing, standing in the middle of the kitchen wall, displaying itself boldly, as though it wanted to be as visible as possible. I felt that familiar rushing fear, as though the floor had dropped away and 1,000 tiny legs are crawling upon every inch of my skin. But there was something else there. I was aware of this spider in a way I had never been of others that preceded it. It wasn't the biggest, maybe an inch wide, but its abdomen was swelled grotesquely. I could feel every one of its void black eyes focused upon me, see each hair on its fat, bulbous body, and smell the venom I knew dripped from its fangs. I hate spiders, as I have said, but I would have sworn that this one hated me back. None of this was enough to make me think twice about gingerly pushing Major Tom towards the thing with my foot and fleeing the room. I made my way into the living room and closed the door behind me, leaving cat and spider to deal with each other.
No.
I sat watching the TV, some panel show rerun, trying not to think about the thing on my kitchen wall. An
You
hour
were
passed,
cruel.
then 2, and finally I felt like I had enough stability of mind to open the door and confirm that the damned arachnid was gone. The moment I opened the door, I felt something furry brush against my leg. Choking down a sudden moment of panic, I looked, and sure enough, there was Major Tom, hurrying out of the room at a run. He didn't seem hurt or upset, so I assumed his job was done. And I turned back to my kitchen and froze. The spider sat in that same spot. It wasn't eaten, it hadn't fled. From what I could tell, it hadn't even moved. The only way I was sure the thing was real and alive was that I swear to you I could see its mandibles twitching with anticipation. I stood there, unable to summon the will to close the kitchen door or enter into it fully, and cursed Major Tom for a useless bag of fur. It was another hour before I was finally able to move. The whole time I stood motionless in the doorway, watching the fat spider that paraded itself on my wall. Still, it remained in place, and I couldn't help but feel that it was daring me to do something, to take action, to kill it. I began to move.
Look, it's in my head.
Ever so slowly I approached it, reaching a hand over the table and taking the half-drunk mug of coffee, now long cold, in my hand. I gripped the handle so tight I was sure it would snap off in my fingers. Finally, I stood before the spider, preparing myself to calmly crush it against the wall.
You would think he would have
Then
bug
it moved
spray,
without
though.
warning, and I hurled the mug against the wall with all my might. It hit the spider dead on and exploded in a shower of coffee and china. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, but all that remained was a large stain on the wall and mug shards littering the floor. I should have cleaned it up immediately, but I was so tired, as though killing the spider had taken every ounce of wakefulness that I had within me.
It does, though.
I simply turned around and went to bed. My dreams that night were many-legged, but there's not much unusual in that. I spent the next morning cleaning
No
up the detritus from my
buggies.
battle with the spider. I wished that I had gotten the coffee cleaned before it had dried, but by lunchtime the place was looking very much as it had before. As I swept up the smashed mug, I noticed that the largest shard, emblazoned with the design of a stylized blue owl, had a vivid smear on it. Brown, red, and green were crushed onto it where it had hit the spider. It disgusted me, but looking at it, I couldn't help but feel a small surge of triumph, and I smiled as I threw it into the garbage bag. Major Tom watched, impassive as always. The next few days passed without incident. Major Tom had never been much of an indoor cat, so I had installed a cat flap some time before to allow him to come and go as he pleased. After that first encounter, he seemed to spend more time outside, and I saw him less and less as the week progressed. I didn't think much of it. We'd had a particularly mild Christmas, so it made sense that he'd be enjoying the outside as much as possible before winter really set in. It was the Friday after my first encounter that it happened. I came in from work, tired after a difficult week. I used to work as a data analyst at an online betting company, and decided to order takeout and relax in front of some TV. I eased myself back into my armchair and reached for the remote. I was aware that Major Tom wasn't anywhere to be seen, which was odd, since he usually got fed shortly after I arrived home, and he was never one to miss a meal. Still, I didn't think of it, and turned on the television. I hadn't turned on the satellite box, so what showed at first was an empty blue screen. I reached to the other remote to turn it on, when I realized the blue screen wasn't empty. There, sat on it, black against the glowing background, was a spider. And not just any spider, but I swear to you, and here's where you march me out of your little institute as a time-wasting lunatic, but I swear that it was the same damn spider. It was the same size, the same shape, the same thick, pulsing abdomen, but more than that, I felt it. I felt it in that fear that hit me like I had been punched in the stomach, and I felt it in the way that that thing just sat there, unmoving, waiting for me to kill it again. I was stuck to my chair, just watching this spider as it stood there on the screen of my television. I called for Major Tom, but there was no response. God knows how long I sat staring at the spider on my television. I don't wear a watch, and I couldn't move my arm to check my phone. If I hadn't been sat down, I would have run already, but standing up was more movement than I could bring myself to make while it watched me. Finally, I got to my feet. It was less effort than I expected when I finally mustered the will to do it. Although that's not really how it felt at the time. At that point, it felt almost involuntary, as though something were lifting me, hoisting me to my feet by unseen strings. I began to walk, but rather than fleeing the spider, I found I moved towards it, till I stopped there, so close I could have touched it, though my mind recoils at the thought. Before I realized exactly what I was doing, I lifted my leg and kicked the television, instantly crushing the bulbous spider beneath the heel of my shoe, and, now I think about it, narrowly avoiding a nasty electrocution. I had had no inkling I was capable of such a thing, but once again the spider was dead, and I had a slimy stain on my shoe. I threw the shattered remains of the television away, burned the shoe, and tried desperately to return to something approaching my normal life, but it was no good. The spider that I had killed had come back, of that I had no doubt, and a deep paranoia began to set in as I waited for it to return again. I saw Major Tom only once in the weeks that followed. He came
The cat knew.
sniffed at the bowl of food I had continued to put out for him in the vain hope of luring him back, and turned around and walked away. As he left, he gave me a look that I could have sworn was one of pity. I called in sick to my job, as I wasn't really sleeping, and so much of the time was spent checking nooks and corners for the spider that I was a nervous wreck.
Why would you want
More
to
than
stay
once I did
there?
find spiders, but they weren't the one that was after me, so I killed them without a second thought. My life descended into the mess that it still remains today. I was right, though. 2 weeks after I kicked it to death on my TV, there it was, over my bed, standing on the wall, over the spot where my head lay each night as I tried in vain to sleep. It was that damned spider, and I recognized it. My bedroom's better lit than the kitchen, and it wasn't silhouetted against a screen, so for the first time, I got a really good look at my tormentor. And I realized that I had seen it before the kitchen. I was not born with a fear of spiders. In fact, for the first 6 years of my life, I can only assume I existed in peaceful harmony with them. But that changed in the autumn of 1991. I didn't live in London then, but with my parents in Southampton, and we would visit my grandparents every Sunday out in the nearby New Forest. They lived on the edge of a suburb, and from the bottom of my grandmother's garden you could see fields stretching away for a half a mile to the tree line. I used to spend a lot of time down there, and if you were lucky, sometimes there would be horses. That day, there were no horses, just an overcast sky and wind that threatened to blow off my blue woolen hat. I was wandering through the scattered trees by the fence I wasn't allowed to cross, and I noticed a fallen log. I had seen it before, of course, as there was little in that place that changed much between my weekly visits. But there was something different about it. In one of the hollows sat something that I did not recognize. It was pale brown, looked soft and lumpy, like a small sack. Knowing no better, I approached it and saw, perched on its top, a small spider. It watched me, warily, its fat abdomen twitching, but it did not move. In my childish ignorance, I thought it looked silly, and I reached over for it, but I tripped. My hand hit the spider, killing it instantly and plunging into the egg sac below, causing it to tear open and explode. I was suddenly covered in thousands of small, white crawling things, those tiny, dripping, half-formed and unfinished spiders. They covered my hands, my face, my eyes. I can never forget that feeling. And since then, the presence of spiders has filled me with the deepest dread. And that was the spider that sat before me on my bedroom wall. Though I remember little of what the long-dead thing had looked like, I knew it was the same. Can you be haunted by the ghost of a spider that destroyed your childhood? It sounds absurd, it sounds laughable. But there it was. I didn't know why it was here. And I didn't know why I was reaching for it. My mind screamed to stop, and I let out a terrible cry, but my hand kept moving towards it inexorably, as though willed by something else. This ghost spider felt real enough when I crushed it beneath my palm, legs splayed and body bursting warmly against my skin. Once I had control of my limb once again, I spent the rest of the night washing my hand.
Yes.
I am moving out of that building. I officially gave Major Tom's paperwork to the family on the ground floor he decided to move in with, and will be leaving the moment I find somewhere, anywhere available for immediate rental. I can't risk seeing the thing again. I'm also seeing doctors trying to get a referral for psychiatric treatment or possibly some antipsychotic medication. But I felt I should probably give you a statement as well. I don't expect you to believe me, but if ghost spiders falls under anyone's remit, I suppose it's yours. Statement ends. I think the most important lines in this statement come at the very end. Antipsychotic medication and disbelief are, I think, exactly what Mr. Vittery needed to get through his problem with, ghost spiders. There simply aren't enough details given in this statement to actually investigate, short of Martin confirming that Mr. Vittery did indeed live at the addresses he provided. I would have asked him to follow up with Mr. Vittery himself, but he appears to have passed away shortly after giving his statement. He was found in his Boothby Road residence after neighbours complained of the smell and had apparently been dead for over a week. Coroner's report lists asphyxiation as the cause of death, probably due to choking, though it doesn't say what he choked on. Simply lists foreign organic material blocking his throat. If I were of a more alarmist nature, I might think the appearance of Mr. Vittery's corpse lent some credibility to his tale. But as I told Martin earlier, he was there for over a week. So there is very likely a perfectly natural explanation for the fact that his body was completely encased in web.
No.
End recording.
Ground control to Major Tom. No. How could you not control your own hand? Why would you even use your hand? And why didn't he have any bug spray? And the cat was like, yeah, man, I can't volunteer my services anymore. You're on your own. Oh, man. All right. I think we're gonna make it to these last two, and then we're gonna stop at 19, so that way we can start the two-parter when we pick up next. Number 17 of the Magnus Archive, the Bone Turner's Toe. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No, I don't want to look.
Rusty Quill presents
You said
the
not
Magnus Archives.
no spider or buggy anything. Don't be cruel.
Episode 17.
Why is it
The
cute
Bone
though? But it's still spidey. Dang it. Do the arms pat you to sleep? I might consider it. This cute.
Statement of Sebastian Arakoya regarding a new acquisition at Chiswick Library. Original statement given June 10th, 1999.
Oh wait, I don't remember
Audio
this
recording
one.
by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Books are amazing, aren't they?
Yes.
I mean, when you think about what they really are. People don't give the actuality of language the weight it deserves, I feel. Words are a way of taking your thoughts, the very makeup of yourself, and giving them to another. Putting your thoughts in the mind of someone else. They are not a perfect method, of course, as there's plenty of scope for mutation and corruption between your mind and that of the listener, but that doesn't change the essence of what language is. Spoken aloud, though, the thought dies quickly if not picked up. Simple vibrations that vanish almost as soon as they are created. Though if they find a host, then they can lodge there, proliferate, and maybe spread further. Still, it is not a reliable method in terms of a thought's endurance, as humans are fragile creatures and rarely last a century. A book, though, is another story. There are written texts that have outlived the civilizations that created them. Imagine thoughts hundreds, thousands of years old, preserved and ready to be taken again. Corrupted or translated perhaps by a culture that does not understand them, but still, ideas that have outlived by lifetimes the mind that first conceived them. Will the thoughts that first ran through Shakespeare's head ever stop being thought by someone, somewhere? And a book so dense with a mind's fossilized creations, is it any wonder they have been ascribed such power throughout the ages? Or that an old library with heavy tomes covering every wall seems to have such a weight to it, beyond the physical presence of the texts it holds? I used to work at Chiswick Library. I didn't have such ideas back then, though. I just knew I loved books, always had. And so when the opportunity arose to work in my local library, I jumped at the chance. I had been a
Mr.
voracious reader ever
Obvious.
since I was old enough to hold a book for myself, and even before that, my mother tells me I would pester her constantly to read to me. I suppose you might say my mind has always been receptive to the thoughts that lurk in the written page. Still, Chiswick Library is a long way from the cramped and austere libraries you're probably imagining. It's light and airy, with bookshelves and carpets that speak more of cash-strapped local councils than of the rich majesty of knowledge. It has an extensive children's section, and the vast majority of its stock are dog-eared paperbacks of true crime, literary fiction, and reference books. It has a modest collection of books on tape, and the atmosphere, though quiet, is far from oppressive. In a word, I would sum the place up as unthreatening. It was 3 years ago when this happened. I had already been working there for about a year when the book first turned up. Now, we used to buy all of our books new, and I never did any of the acquisitions for the library, so I couldn't say when or where it might have been bought from. But it looked old and pretty beaten up when I first noticed it. It was handed back with 4 other books at the front desk, and as I was scanning them through, I noticed that one of the barcodes didn't seem to match up. The barcode and ISBN both registered as being that of Train Spotting by Irvin Welsh, but the book itself was an almost featureless black paperback, with a title on the front in faded white serif font, The Bone Turner's Tale. I was a bit confused and called the librarian, Ruth Weaver, over to ask about it. She didn't recall seeing it ever before, but stuck in the front was the ex libris bookplate of Chiswick Library, as well as a lending label with a handful of stamps going back several years. Ruth shrugged and told me not to worry too much about it. We'd get it recorded and put on the system properly. But something about the situation bothered me, so I decided to check the record of the man who had returned it. His name, at least according to his library card, was Michael Crew, and sure enough, 3 weeks ago he had borrowed 4 books from us, specifically the 4 others he had returned. I suggested to Ruth that perhaps he was a self-published author who was trying to trick his way onto our shelves, and she laughed, saying it was probably it. Although why anyone would go to the trouble of faking it just to get on the shelves of Chiswick Library was beyond her. The book looked worn, though, like it had seen decades of being read, with a line creased down the spine and one half of the cover faded from the sun. Nor, from what I could see, did it list any author at all. It was at that moment that Jared Hopworth came in, and I had to put the book to one side. Jared and I had once been fast friends, growing up on the same road, attending the same schools. We had spent much of our early life as inseparable. But he had always been, well, not to put too fine a point on it, thick as mud, and when I went away to university, he stayed behind. I think he saw it as something of a betrayal, and when I finally returned, I knew immediately something had changed between us. He spent the time I was away becoming a bit of a crook, and upon my return began what would eventually become a campaign of petty terror. He was always very careful to stop before he did anything that might get the police involved, and I guess there was enough leftover affection from a childhood spent together that I never really thought about reporting him. It was... Oh.
Oh my god, that
hello,
scared
alive?
me for a second.
Not really. I'm sort of in the middle of something.
I understand. It's just that Miss Hearn has lodged a complaint.
A complaint? I could just as easily complain about her wasting my time.
That's not how it works, Jonathan.
I wouldn't have even needed to do the recording if Rosie had kept her equipment in better condition.
Regardless, I would prefer that you not antagonize anyone connected to the Lucas family. They are patrons of the Institute after all.
Fine, I'll be more lovely. Now, can I get back to work?
Very well. By the way, have you seen Martin?
Oh, he's off sick this week. Stomach problems, I think. Blessed relief, if you ask me. Statement resumes. It was worst when Jared visited the library, because that inevitably meant that he was bored enough to seek me out for harassment. Sure enough, he started chatting with me, meaningless jibes that served to wait it out until Ruth, who didn't know about Jared's problems with me, returned to her office and closed the door. As soon as she had done so, he turned and in a single movement tipped over the metal returns cart, spilling the recently received books all over the floor. He smiled at me and apologized. I did my best not to show any irritation or indeed any reaction at all as I slowly walked around and bent down to start collecting them. As I rose to my feet, I felt an impact on the back of my head and staggered. Behind me, Jared stood holding the book I had put aside, The Bone Turner's Tale, and had apparently picked it up to hit me with. But rather than offering me a fake apology or further violence, instead his eyes were locked on the book. We stood there in silence for a few seconds until he said something about needing something new to read, turned around and walked off. I will admit, a bit unsettled. As far as I could recall, I had never seen Jared read, well, anything, really. The look in his eyes when he had left had something in it not entirely unlike fear. Still, it was a welcome relief to have him gone, and I quickly tidied up the rest of the books before Ruth noticed anything amiss. There was nothing else I recall that happened that day at the library. But on the way home afterwards, I passed by Jared's house. I had moved back in with my parents while I got everything sorted out after university, and he had never moved out of his childhood home, so we still lived on the same street. It was late September at this point, so by the time I had walked back from the library it was dark, and I noticed a small shape moving in the pool of orange light below the street lamp. As I got closer, I realized with a slight start that it was a rat, and not a dirty, wild rat, but a large, white one, quite well kept and clearly once a pet. There was something very wrong with it. It was dragging itself slowly, pulling from the front legs, and I saw that the back half of it was flat, as though deflated somehow. I thought it must have been run over, but there was no blood or sign of crushing, nor did it seem to be in any actual pain. It just had a back half that flopped and twitched obscenely as it made its gradual way across the lighted pavement and out into the darkness. I just stood there and watched, transfixed by it, until it disappeared from view. Thinking about it now, I remember its head was turned at a strange angle, far further round than it should have been, although I might be getting confused. Many of these experiences run together when I look back on them. There was no light on in Jared's house, but I hurried home quickly after that. I didn't see Jared again for some time. At first I was just happy for the space, and as the days turned into weeks I started to feel something I wouldn't have expected to. Worry. If it hadn't been for the way he had left last time, it probably wouldn't have bothered me, but he had looked so strange. And even without him coming to the library, it was rare I would go a week without seeing him. By now it had been almost a month. Still, I resisted the urge to go to his house and check. If it turned out he was fine, then I'd be inviting a whole world of unpleasantness. And besides that, I reminded myself, he wasn't my problem anymore. It was late October when Jared's mother came in. It was near the end of the day, and outside was already dark. I was putting up a display about good Halloween wreaths before heading home, when I heard the door open. I turned around and there she was. It took me a few seconds to recognize her, if I'm honest. I hadn't seen much of her in the years since Jared and I had been close, and she had aged noticeably. Mrs. Hopworth wore a bulky overcoat, though it wasn't that cold yet, and her arm hung down in a sling. Something about the angle of the arm and how it hung there seemed faintly abnormal, and I wondered if she had broken it. When I asked Mrs. Hopworth if she was okay, she just stared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. With her good arm, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small black paperback. She threw it on the floor without saying a word and turned to leave. I couldn't help myself. I asked her if Jared was all right. She spun back and started to swear violently at me. Told me I had no business with her son and that I and my books were to stay away from him. As she spoke, I couldn't look away from her arm, and the odd ways it twisted as she gestured, how her fingers seemed to bend the wrong way. I was glad that Ruth had gone home early, as I didn't want her to witness the disturbing confrontation I had now apparently caused. When she had finished, Mrs. Hopworth spat towards me, though I noticed she was careful to avoid spitting at the book that now lay on the floor between us, and left. I put down the copy of Stephen King's Misery that I now realized I'd been clutching, and approached the discarded volume that lay on the carpet. The battered black cover seemed the same as when I had first seen it weeks ago, with that faded white title on the front. The Bone Turner's Tale. I reached down to pick it up, but before I did so, a thought flashed across my mind, a memory of the last time I had seen Jared, and I grabbed some tissues from the desk before using them to pick up the book. Even then I felt my skin crawl as I held it. I decided not to deal with it that night. I wasn't entirely sure that reading it in the daytime would be that much better, but the shadows cast from outside seemed to have gotten that much starker since the book had been brought back into my library, and it scared me. I placed it in the book returns cart and left, double-checking I had firmly locked the door behind me. It rained heavily that night. My room is in a converted attic, and when the weather is bad, it's as if I can hear every raindrop against the window that is just above my bed. It wasn't a storm. There wasn't the wind for it. It was just that heavy, pounding rain that drummed and beat on the glass above me. I couldn't sleep. There was a nagging apprehension in my mind, something that, after 3 hours lying in bed, had turned into almost a panic. How could I have just left the book? There was something wrong with it, that much was obvious. What if Ruth came in earlier than I did tomorrow and took it? What would happen to her? Should I have destroyed it? That last thought was quickly pushed away. I wasn't sure I had it in me to destroy a book, even one with such a strangeness to it. It surprised me just how easily I accepted that the Bone Turner's Tale had dark powers, but I suppose I've always felt that books have a sort of magic to them, so it was really just a confirmation of what I had suspected deep down for a long time. It was 2 a.m. when I decided that I couldn't just leave it there overnight. I got up, dressed, and quietly headed out into the rain towards the library, making sure to take my gloves. My coat was supposed to be water resistant, but still managed to soak in the 20 minutes it took me to walk there. I had the key from locking up that night and deactivated the alarm as I entered. It was almost pitch black inside, and part of me wanted to keep it that way, but I turned on as many of the lights as I could without it being immediately obvious outside the building. It wasn't many, and I still had to half feel my way through the foyer and into the library proper. As I approached the desk, the book returns cart where I'd left the bone turner's tale, I began to step less cautiously. It was darker in that corner of the library, and I put a hand out to steady myself against the handle of the small metal cart. I'd taken my gloves off at that point, and my hand came away wet. I quickly fumbled for the torch I had snatched before heading out and turned it on. Red dripped and pulsed from the cart, soaking the pages and forming a small pool around it. The books were bleeding. I laughed at that. It seemed so appropriate somehow, so utterly correct that those neighbouring books should suffer, should be contaminated by it. Just as it seemed right and proper that when my torch found the bone turner's tale, it was dry, unmarked by the gory scene around it. I put my gloves back on and carefully took out that sinister volume and placed it on the desk. Perhaps I should have fought harder against the temptation to look inside, but my curiosity was too strong. The thick gloves made turning individual pages almost impossible, and I still had enough good sense to keep them on. So I just opened it on a few random pages and started reading. Perhaps I was being paranoid. After all, I touched the book with my bare hands when it was first given into the library, and had no problems. But the image of Jared's mother wouldn't leave my head. How her arm had twisted when it moved. I decided to keep the gloves on. It was written in prose, and certainly seemed to be a story of some kind. The part I read dealt with an unnamed man, at various points referred to as the bone turner, the bonesmith, or just the turner, watching an assembled group of people as they made their way into a small village. It's unclear from what I read whether he is travelling with them or simply following them, but I remember being unsettled by the details he observed in them. The way the parson would move his hand over his mouth whenever he stared too long at the nuns, or how the cook looked at the meat he prepared with the same eyes that looked at the pardoner. It was only at that point that I realized the book was describing the pilgrims from the Canterbury Tales. Now, this certainly wasn't some lost section of a Chaucer classic. It was written in modern English, with none of the archaic spelling or pronunciation of the original. Besides that, the writing itself was of questionable quality. There was something compelling about it, though. The debate about how finished the Canterbury Tales were, well, it's a very real debate. In the prologue, over 100 tales are promised, but the most complete surviving version doesn't even reach 24. The book just sort of ends, with Chaucer adding a short epilogue imploring God for forgiveness, a plea that is generally read as sarcastic or rhetorical. I flicked ahead a few pages and found the bonesmith had apparently crept up to the miller while he slept. It described him silently reaching inside him, and it's a bit hazy. All I remember clearly is the line, "And from his rib a flute to play that merry tune of Marrow took." And as for the rest, I don't recall in detail. But I know that I almost threw up, and that the miller did not survive. This was on page 16, and it was a thick book. I turned to the frontispiece, desperately curious as to how this book had ended up in our library. In the harsh light of the torch, I could see the creases and peeling edges of the Chiswick Library label, which usually meant it had been removed and restuck, or taken from another book entirely. I could even see the edges of another label underneath. Using a pair of scissors, I carefully peeled off the top one, but was disappointed. It was the label for another library, probably the last place it had been left, but I think it must have been in Scandinavia, because it was something like the Library of Jürgensburg, or Jürgenlight, or Jürgenlicht, or something like that. It didn't help me. I was all set to return to reading the thing when I heard the sound of breaking glass behind me. I turned around to see Jared Hopworth standing in front of the shattered window. Or at least, I assume it was Jared, as it demanded the book from me in Jared's voice, but wore loose-fitting trousers and a thick coat with a hood that almost completely covered his face. Or its face. He was longer than Jared had been, and stood at a strange angle as though his legs were too stiff to use. When he gestured for the book, I saw that his fingers looked sharp, as though the skin at the ends were being pushed into a tight point by something inside. I told him that the library was closed, because at that moment I could think of nothing else to say. He ignored me and demanded again that I give him the book. That was when I did something a little rash, which is to say I punched him. I had never really thrown a punch in anger before, or even desperation, so it came as quite a shock to me when I managed to drive a single solid fist into his solar plexus. But as I did this, and this is the part that still gives me nightmares, I felt his flesh give way and almost retract, drawing me in close. Then I felt his ribs shift, shut tight around my hand as though his rib cage were trying to bite me. They were sharper than I would have thought possible. And at last, this was what actually started me screaming. Never before or since have I ever screamed like that, and I'm still a bit surprised I'm capable of making such a noise, but there you have it. In my panic, I dropped the copy of The Bone Turner's Tale, and in less than a second, Jared was on it. He released my hand and grabbed it with a frantic desperation before he turned to run back out the way he came in. I started to chase after him until I saw how he was moving. How many limbs he had. He had added some extras. That was the moment it finally all got too much for me. I stopped running. It wasn't my book. It wasn't my responsibility. And I had no idea what I was dealing with. So I didn't. I just stood there in a daze and watched the thing that was once Jared disappear out into the rain. I never saw him again. The police turned up soon after. Someone had apparently heard my screams and called in a report. I spun some tale about falling asleep at my desk and being woken up by an attempted robbery. God knows how I explained the bloody books, because it wasn't some disappearing phantom. It took weeks to get out. Everyone seemed to believe me, though, and miraculously I kept my job. I haven't seen Jared in the years since, and I haven't done any further research on the book. The best scenario I can possibly imagine is that this statement is the last I ever need to hear or speak about Jared Hopworth or the Bone Turner's Tale. Statement ends. Well, this makes me deeply unhappy. I've barely scratched the surface of the archives, and I've already uncovered evidence of 2 separate surviving books from Jürgen Leitner's library. Until he mentioned that, I was tempted to dismiss much of it out of hand. But as it stands now, I believe every word. I've seen what Leitner's work can do, and this news, even 17 years out of date, is still very concerning to me. I'm going to have a discussion with Elias as to what we can do to address the issue. I know he'll just give me the old record and study, not interfere or contain speech again, but I at least need to make him aware of it. Tim and Sasha have cross-referenced the events here with police reports, and sure enough, there was a warrant issued for the arrest of Jared Hopworth for breaking and entering, as well as assault. He was never found, though, and the crimes weren't serious enough to keep the case active for very long. I've been doing as much research myself as possible, but the book seems to have vanished along with him. I asked Martin to try and hunt down Mr. Adekoya himself for a follow-up, but have been informed that he passed away in 2006. He was found lying dead in the middle of the road on the night of April 17th. Despite the fact that there was no crushing or trauma marks on the body, the inquest ruled it a hit-and-run car accident due to the mangled position in which he was found. It was a closed casket funeral.
Oh.
Recording it.
Oh.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed.
Or was it because he touched the book as well? Alright, last one before we all go off to Slumberland. Hopefully. I feel my ABs. It is good time to go to bed. And then the next time we'll pick up with the two-parter. Alright. This is episode number 18. The Man Upstairs. Thank you for spending time with me tonight. And I do hope that you have sweet dreams. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Rusty Quill presents The Magnus Archives.
I don't remember what this one was about.
Episode 18. The Man Upstairs.
Just block it out, man.
Statement of Christoph Rudenko regarding his interactions with a first-floor resident of Welbeck
This is probably
House,
not a good one to leave
Wandsworth.
off on.
Original statement given December 12th, 2008. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Never buy a ground floor flat. It may seem like a good idea, especially if, like me, you just spent a decade dragging shopping up 3 flights of stairs every week, but it's noisier, always has a worse view, and is far more prone to break-ins and other problems. And then there is the matter of upstairs neighbours. I know that higher floors will, more often than not, also have people living above you, and moving from living in a top-floor flat to the ground floor like I did is not a common thing, but it's still true. I never had any real concerns about it until I moved to the ground floor of Welbeck House. These days I keep a much closer eye on those I live near. Welbeck House is a 5-storey block of flats in Wandsworth town centre. A great area to live, actually. It's close enough to London proper that you can commute in easily, and enough amenities that you don't often need to, especially if, like me, you're self-employed. It wasn't cheap, but I've always been good with money, so when I decided to try and actually buy a place at age 34, I was able to afford a nice flat. After almost a year of searching, I settled on the ground floor at Welbeck. At the time, I hadn't really given much thought to my neighbours. Those I had encountered in the course of buying the place had seemed nice enough, and the previous owners of my flat hadn't mentioned anything. On the day I moved in, this would have been late 2002, I saw a man smoking, leaning out of the window just above my own. It was a grey, overcast day, and the forecast had said there would be rain later, so I was keen to move the last of my boxes inside and start unpacking, and I didn't really pay him much attention. I remember that he was wearing a hooded jacket, though, pulled up tight and obscuring most of his face. We locked eyes briefly. At least, I assume we did. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt him looking at me. And I could swear I smelled the weirdest odour. It's hard to describe, halfway between the smell of a pavement after rain on a hot day and chicken that's starting to turn. It was unpleasant, to say the least, but the wind changed and it was gone as quickly as it came. The man in the upstairs window kept watching as I took my boxes inside, just continuing to smoke in silence, till at one point I came outside to get the last bits and noticed he was gone. I was slightly spooked by the encounter. It's hard to say exactly why, as aside from the smell, which could have come from anywhere, there was nothing outwardly upsetting about it. Yet something in the man's manner had shaken me. I didn't even know at the time whether it was a man. That was just an assumption I made, but I certainly had no plans to check. I'm quite a private person, so the idea of going round and trying to meet my neighbours at all was not one that I gave a lot of consideration, let alone this one who had spent the better part of half an hour staring at me. I decided to ignore the whole thing and get on with the process of moving in. I was very successful at ignoring the man upstairs, at least at first. It wasn't difficult, as he was usually quiet and rarely came out of his flat as far as I could tell. In fact, as the time in my new home wore on, I started to recognise the other residents of Welbeck House. The white family that lived across the hall with their little girl. I sometimes heard her in the evening loudly protesting her bedtime. The old spinster next door, Diane, I think her name was, or Diana. The Asian guy on the first floor that worked nights and slammed the doors too much. I doubt I ever exchanged more than a dozen words with any of them, but I began to know their sounds and their habits. In all that time, though, I'm not sure I ever saw the man who lived above me. Not in the hallway, not out the window. It was like he didn't exist, which was fine by me, except that I would still very occasionally catch a whiff of that smell, rotten and earthy. It would catch me by surprise, and I'd usually spend a minute trying to track it down before it vanished. Once, I swear that as I stopped to look around, I heard the door upstairs close quietly. It seemed to me pretty obvious it was him. It wasn't ideal, but his hygiene problem was nobody's business but his own, and having figured out the source of the smell, it stopped bothering me quite so much on those rare moments that I caught it in the air currents of our building. It didn't enter my home, although I did take to lighting scented candles just in case, a habit I still keep up today. I decided all that was important to me was that he was quiet, which he was, at least for the first couple of years. The banging started on 5th July 2004. I know because it was the day before my 37th birthday, and I was unpacking a crate of beer for the friends I had invited over. At first I assumed the man upstairs was just nailing something into the wall, but after 10 minutes it still hadn't stopped. Instead it just seemed to move. While at first it sounded like something being nailed into his wall, the banging started to move downwards, until it seemed he was knocking things right into the floor. At one point he was hammering directly over the light, causing it to sway slightly with each blow. This went on for almost an hour, and all I could do was try to ignore it, as there was nothing I wanted to do less than climb those stairs and knock on his door. Even so, by the time it finally finished, I was on the verge of doing exactly that. It did stop, though, and after it became clear it wasn't coming back anytime soon, I tried to put it out of my mind and get back to my preparations. Thankfully, there was no disturbance from upstairs during my small party the following night, just the family from across the hall at one point asking for the music to be turned down. In fact, I didn't hear anything from him for another 2 weeks, when the banging started again. Again, it was almost an hour of hammering first into the walls, then moving down onto the floor, before stopping altogether. I was not happy about this, as I'm sure you can imagine, but I was still reluctant to confront this nameless person who lived over me, so I let it slide. From that point on, every 2 weeks it came, the hammering for an hour or thereabouts. I tried to find someone to complain to, but it seemed like whoever lived there owned the flat outright, so there was no landlord or housing association that I could report him to. The final straw came about 6 months later. It was actually a very simple thing. I got a package delivered incorrectly to my flat. It was addressed to Mr. Toby Carlyle, and the flat number on it was not mine, but that of my upstairs neighbour. The envelope was thick and soft. It must have been mainly full of bubble wrap or other packing material. It wasn't much, but it gave me another reason to go upstairs, and while delivering it, I could politely request that he stop his fortnightly hammering. It was harder than I thought to walk up those stairs, and I was surprised to find that my legs were shaking slightly as I reached the top. I got another whiff of that dank, rotten smell as I approached. The carpet immediately in front of the door was stained, ever so slightly, a darker colour than it should have been, as though something had leaked out from underneath it. The wood was old and worn compared to the others in the building, which looked to have been replaced relatively recently. There was no number on it, or any indication that it was, in fact, Toby Carlyle who lived there. I knocked, trying to give the action a confidence that I frankly did not feel. There was no answer, so I knocked again, louder this time. I heard some movement from inside, gradually heading towards the door. The steps were muffled, like he was walking over thick carpet, until they stopped on the other side. There was no sound at all. I waited for a minute and was just about to knock again when the door opened, just a crack. There didn't seem to be any lights on inside. It wasn't open wide enough for me to get a good look, or even see the man himself, but it was enough that I heard when a cracked, ragged voice spoke. It said, "What do you want?" Through the crack I was hit by a sudden wave of that rancid air and reeled backwards, fighting back the urge to vomit. Through it I had just about managed to stammer out the question as to whether he was Toby Carlyle, but I'd had a delivery for him. There was silence for a second. Then a hand shot out and grabbed the package I held, pulling it out of my grasp before I had a chance to fully realize what was happening. The hand was thin and pale, with the long, filthy yellow fingernails. On the back, I saw a single dark red mark that might have been a cut or a lesion, but it was gone before I had a chance to see it in more detail. The door slammed in my face, and I was left standing in the hall, nauseous and confused. As I turned to go, I noticed that there was a spot of viscous liquid on my jacket sleeve where the hand had brushed me, thick and off-white. I had to throw the jacket out in the end. I couldn't get rid of the smell. And so that was it for a long time. The man upstairs was named Toby, and he was a disgusting shut-in who smelled rancid and occasionally made hammering noises. It was a long way from ideal, but it was something I could understand and live with. 2 years passed like this, and I had almost forgotten about him, to be honest. He had become just another part of my life and could be lived around. It wasn't until late 2007 I had cause to really think about him again. My mother's health had taken a turn for the worst over the previous few months, and I had made the decision to move back up to Sheffield to be nearer to her. As I mentioned, I'm self-employed, so the move wasn't as much of a difficulty as it might have been, but it did leave me with the need to sell my flat. I don't want to get bogged down with the details of my mother's ailments. In the end, she actually passed away a few months later from complications following an operation. I still ended up moving, though for a very different reason. It was difficult to sell the place. Every time someone came round for a viewing, it ended the same way, and I started to dread when the inevitable question would come, "What's that smell?" It was the third time that the potential buyers, a nice professional couple who worked in the city, pointed out the stain on the living room ceiling. It was subtle at first, a slight discoloration that I had managed to overlook. They assumed it was a leak, and I did too, promising to have a plumber come over and check it out, though I didn't hear back from them anyway. I did call for a plumber, but for whatever reason was told that it would be another week before they could see me. I tried to have a couple more viewings in that time, but the stain on the ceiling was becoming more obvious, and the smell had begun to pervade my whole flat, to the point where I was thinking about staying in a hotel until the plumber arrived. I was starting to doubt it was a leaking water pipe. As it grew, it started to turn a dark yellow in colour, and glistened ever so slightly when the light hit it. I knew it was something to do with the flat upstairs, though when I went up to ask this time, my knocking went unanswered. Finally, the plumber arrived. He wrinkled his nose when he entered, though didn't make any comment about it. I assume unpleasant smells are just part of his job. I pointed him towards the stain on the ceiling, and he looked momentarily confused, before telling me what I already knew, that this didn't look like a problem with the pipes. Still, he said he'd need to knock through the ceiling to have a look, and I'd need a contractor to come and redo that bit of ceiling anyway. I stood back when he put up his stepladder and climbed up to have a look at it. He put on a pair of rubber gloves and gingerly touched the spot, testing it with his fingers. It collapsed almost immediately, buckling and tearing like wet cardboard, and the fluid that oozed out of it was a sickly yellow in colour, with viscous white lumps glistening in it. The plumber looked like he was going to throw up. I did throw up. He made his apologies and said he'd have to call someone. I didn't try to stop him leaving. I was furious, and the anger that surged through me overcame any apprehension I might have felt from approaching the flat upstairs. I stormed up and began to hammer on the door, shouting and threatening that I'd call the police if he didn't answer. On my third knock, the door swung inwards ever so slightly, and I realized it was not locked. There is little in my life that I regret quite as much as going inside. I pushed the door open as much as I could, but it didn't open very wide, as there seemed to be some sort of resistance behind it. The smell would have been overpowering, but by this point I was almost used to it and fought down the nausea. There was no light coming from inside, and I fumbled on the wall for a switch. I found it, and the instant before I flicked it on, I realized I felt something soft and wet on the wall next to it. Unfortunately, before I had a chance to fully comprehend what I was feeling, I had turned on the light and saw Toby Carlyle's flat in its entirety. The light that came on was weak and tinged with red, but it was enough to see by. I looked around and saw that every surface, the walls, the floor, the tables, everything except the curtained windows, was covered in meat. Steaks, chunks of chicken, even a whole leg of what I assume was once lamb, had been nailed everywhere. There were layers of it, the newest additions simply stuck on top of the old, and a putrid yellow-white rot could be seen where the oldest pieces had long since turned to liquid. Flies buzzed thick in the air, and maggots carpeted the place. Looking up, I saw the light, too, had been smeared with meat, causing the place to be bathed in that dull red light. Lying there, in the centre of the hallway, was the body of Toby Carlyle. His hood was pulled back, and I saw his face was covered in puckered septic lesions and holes. I couldn't tell which of them had once housed his eyes. I was frozen in place by the raw horror of what I was seeing, and almost automatically my hand found its way to my phone and I dialed the police. It was only then that my eyes drifted numbly towards the kitchen. There, in the centre of the floor, was a pile of discarded meat and bone, stacked almost as high as a person. It seemed less decayed than the rest of it, though that foul yellow fluid oozed from it, and this is the reason I'm talking to your institute, you see. Everything else could be put down to the problems of a very, very sick man. Nothing supernatural about it, but when I looked at that heaped pile of meat, it moved. I don't know quite how to explain it, other than to tell you that it opened its eyes. It opened all its eyes. The next thing I remember is the police's arrival and a lot of questions from officers trying to hide the fact that they had just finished vomiting. The pile of meat was gone, though the bits that had been nailed to the walls and floors remained. I told the police everything that I just told you, although they dismissed the last bit out of hand. I believe they had to call in a hazmat team in the end. There's not much more to it, really. The rest of the story is largely arguing with insurance companies and counting how many showers it took before I felt clean again. I did move out in the end, and now live in a house in Clapham with some friends, people who are very clean and don't mind the fact that I've recently become a vegetarian. Statement ends. Well, I'm certainly glad I had my lunch before recording this statement. Looking into this one has proven a bit tricky, as police, hospital, and even fire department records give wildly conflicting reports. What we can be sure of is that on the evening of October the 22nd, 2007, there was an incident at a first-floor flat in Welbeck House that involved hazardous biological material and led to the recovery of the body of one Toby Carlyle, the legal owner of the property. The cause of death was listed as gangrene. We contacted Mr. Rudenko, who confirmed that since moving he had had no further experiences he believed to be linked to these events and, after an extensive course of counselling, was attempting to move past them. He did corroborate the existing statement, though, saying he still believed it to be a true account of what happened to him. I'm not entirely sure I agree, although obviously there's little in the way of evidence to the contrary. One thing puzzles me, however. Sasha managed to get access to some of Toby Carlyle's old financial records, and it didn't appear like he had any real money coming in. And what he did have was largely going to pay council tax on the property. There are no records of transactions at any supermarkets or online delivery firms, and Tim even asked around some of the local butchers, as Martin is still off sick. At the end of all this, we've still been unable to answer one question. Where was he getting the meat? I don't know why, but it bothers me. End recording.
Josie Ghosty.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast.
Alright, so that means that our next listening party will start with episode number 19, Confession. But we made a good dent in our listening. It is that time. Sweet dreams wherever you are in the world. Oyasumira or Oyasumi. And we'll have reading tomorrow. So, good night, good night, good night.